Chapter 479. Rog is convinced about the existence of hell and heaven. After all, he just came back from hell not long ago, and he personally planned Cynthia's ascension to heaven. However, this does not mean that he believes in the legend of Adam and Eve, and Cain as the third human being in the world. Heaven and hell are real, but it does not mean that the legend of Adam and Eve is true. In Norse mythology, Odin and Thor are also gods, and Asgard is the so-called god's realm. But in fact, Asgard is just a relatively special existence in the universe, and Odin and Thor are just powerful aliens. To give a very simple example, if he really believes that those legends are true, he has to believe that Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, was born after Loki became a mare. Note 1. But speaking of which, this may be true. Based on Roger's understanding of Loki, the young and frivolous Loki might really do something that would make people's jaws drop just for a moment of excitement. What's more, Loki already had some bad records. After shaking his head and dispelling these goosebump-inducing associations in his mind, Rog said to Daisy, "Go back to the headquarters directly after you've dealt with the things here. I'll take care of the rest." But although Daisy didn't know what Rog was going to do, since he had taken the initiative to speak, Daisy could only obey his instructions. After explaining to Daisy, Rog came to Blade, who had initially recovered from his injuries. "If you're not dead, get up. I'm now a little interested in the profession of vampire hunter. So, I need an experienced guide." Except for Blade, Rog doesn't know other vampire hunters. In fact, until he asked Blade just now, he didn't know that vampire hunters had developed into an independent small society. For a long time, he thought that vampire hunter was just a nominal title, like a keyboard warrior or a great onmyoji. However, reality proved that wherever there were people, there would be jianghu. Even vampire hunters, which were the most unpopular of the unpopular professions, had their own little world. Like Daisy, Blade didn't know what Rog was going to do. But under the huge gap in strength, there was no hope of victory at all. Even if Rog's request was unreasonable, Blade Warrior could only accept this choice. As a vampire hunter with half human and half vampire blood, the Blade Warrior had his own obsession. He could not die before he killed the vampire that had to be killed. No matter what, he had to end the vampire's life with his own hands, no matter the cost. Rog and Blade left the warehouse together and began to go to Blade's secret base. "This is your means of transportation?" Glancing at the black Ducati Monster 696 parked by Blade, Rog asked casually. "Motorcycles are better than cars when hunting vampires." The Blade Warrior gave an answer. Rog didn't like to ride other men's motorcycles. After seeing that Blade's means of transportation was a motorcycle, he summoned his own means of transportation. Dodge Tomahawk. When he went to hell with Ghost Rider Johnny, he drove a Dodge Tomahawk in hell for a while. The excellent performance of Dodge Tomahawk gave him a good driving experience. More importantly, he hasn't found a motorcycle that suits his taste better than Dodge Tomahawk so far. Therefore, after leaving hell, he bought a new Dodge Tomahawk. For Ghost Rider Johnny, Dodge Tomahawk was something he wanted to buy but couldn't afford. For Rog, Dodge Tomahawk was no different from a one-time use prop. After all, the life of the rich was simple and boring. Dodge Tomahawk? This car can't be legally used on the road. You'd better change. Blade didn't expect Rog to summon a Dodge Tomahawk and silently reminded him. "Do you follow the traffic rules and wait for the traffic lights when you're hunting vampires? Can't be legally used on the road? What a joke." They were all people who wandered the world of transcendence, so who would care about such things? And even if traffic rules are violated, it has nothing to do with him. The illegal driver is Minato. What does it have to do with me, Rog? Rog didn't intend to change back to his original appearance. He didn't intend to give up his identity as a member of the Special Forces for the time being. Blade, who was refuted by Rog, froze for a moment, then directly started the motorcycle and drove toward his secret base. After driving the Dodge Tomahawk and following Blade in the streets of Los Angeles for a while, Rog finally arrived at Blade's secret base in Los Angeles. Similar to what he imagined, Blade wasn't the kind of superhero with a particularly good economic condition. This can be seen from the equipment he used and the environment of the base. Blade's secret base is located in the slums of southern Los Angeles, where a large number of bottom-level blacks and Mexicans live, and the security environment is far from comparable to the north. In fact, Los Angeles is only the northern part of Los Angeles. For example, Hollywood, Lakers, California Polytechnic State University, etc., are all in the north. As for the south, it is a complete slum. One city, two worlds. Los Angeles proved with facts that there is only a wall between heaven and hell. However, these have nothing to do with Rog's plan. Of course, if this plan is successful, he doesn't mind buying his own small house in Beverly Hills, a high-end residential area where Hollywood stars gather. Can you hurry up? Rog didn't enter Blade's secret base but stood at the door. How to say, the health standards of Blade's secret base didn't meet his minimum requirements, so he wasn't very willing to go in. Anyway, Blade can't run away, so he didn't bother to go in. The Blade warrior heard Rog's urging, but he didn't answer him. He continued to make his preparations unhurriedly. Although Rog only asked Blade to bring him into the circle of vampire hunters, Blade, who has always been cautious, didn't immediately take him to the bar where vampire hunters gathered. Instead, he returned to his secret base to replenish ammunition. Before the vampires arrived at the warehouse, the Blade warrior had already engaged in several battles. The three vampires were just bait that he deliberately let go. Most vampire hunters wouldn't dare to cast a long line to catch a big fish. But he is not an ordinary vampire hunter. When Rog finished teaching the third wave of gangsters who tried to steal the Dodge Tomahawk, Blade finally came out of his messy and poorly cleaned secret base. You can't just go in like this, your outfit is too official. Blade pointed to Rog's Special Forces uniform. This is simple, it will be done soon. After that, Rog snapped his fingers, and a white smoke instantly enveloped him. When the white smoke dissipated in the air, Rog changed his appearance again. At this time, although he still maintained the appearance of Minato, he was no longer wearing Konoha's Special Forces uniform, but casual clothes. He used transformation jutsu to directly change his clothes, so that he completed the change in an instant. Although too fierce a fight will make transformation jutsu lose its effect, he is not going to fight now. He is just going to the bar where vampire hunters gather. Even if something happens, he doesn't think that those vampire hunters will have the strength to break the effect of his transformation jutsu. Glancing at Rog, who had completely changed his outfit, Blade didn't say anything and directly started his Ducati Monster 696 and drove towards the bar. Bat must die. This is a small bar in the slums of Los Angeles. On the surface, this bar is no different from other shabby and old bars. It is not high-end, there are few guests, and it is also in a remote location that is not easy to find with a map. However, unlike the other old bars, Batty had to die. This bar was not a place that anyone could enter. This is a bar that only vampire hunters can enter. If you are not a vampire hunter, you are not eligible to enter at all. Only vampire hunters are served, this is the rule of this bar. But rules are meant to be broken. Blade didn't explain the rules of the bar to Rog, and he also wanted to see what method Rog, with his amazing fighting power, would use to solve this problem. Looking at Blade, who had been let in by the security guard, but still stayed at the door, Rog suddenly understood. Want to try my means? Rog didn't let Blade do as he wished. He used the simplest and most violent way, but also the most effective way. Boom! The security guard responsible for guarding the bar's door was kicked by him, smashing the wooden door that didn't look strong and flew into the bar. Rog, who kicked the hotel's security guard, acted as if nothing had happened and walked straight to the bar's door. When passing by Blade, he slowed down a little. Without looking at Blade, he said directly, "Don't play tricks in front of me, you can't afford to pay the price." After entering the bar, Rog immediately felt the enthusiasm of these vampire hunters. Except for the security guard who was kicked by him, everyone in the bar, including the bartender, raised their pistols of different models and aimed at him who had just entered the bar. These vampire hunters are really enthusiastic. Rog swept his gaze across the unfriendly vampire hunters. He slowly raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. Golden Bind Illusion. After a snap, these vampire hunters in the bar, without exception, All became puppets that lost their ability to move. Chapter 480. There were many ways to join a new circle. Some people would choose to build a good relationship with the seniors in the circle and let the seniors in the circle recommend them to join. Some people would choose to work hard to increase their value so that they would be qualified to be invited by the circle. These two methods were not only more feasible, but also more in line with the actual situation of most people. However, in this world, there were some people who didn't act according to common sense. Rog was a typical example. Rog didn't choose these two mainstream methods, but chose the method that he was better at and more in line with his personality. Dimensionality reduction. He entered the circle with an irresistible force and made everyone in the circle shut up. Simply put, it was a bit like a professional NBA player joining the circle of a school's basketball team. Although this was a little unreasonable, this world was not a reasonable one to begin with. Seeing that this is the first time you raised your weapon against me, I forgive your ignorance. I'm not here to be your enemy, and you don't deserve to be my enemy. After the restriction is lifted, if anyone dares to point a weapon at me, you'll have to bear the consequences. After that, Rog lifted the restriction effect of the Golden Bind illusion and returned the freedom of movement to these vampire hunters. After doing this, he passed by the security guards who hadn't had time to get up and went straight to the bar counter. He said to the bartender inside, "I want all the information related to vampires in the Los Angeles area. Give me a glass of single malt supreme mellow whiskey, double the amount." When telling the bartender his request, Rog didn't forget to order himself a glass of whiskey. In this kind of old bar, it was unlikely to have expensive or limited whiskey, so he ordered the world's best-selling Irish whiskey, Supreme Mellow. Even the most ordinary bar could not have Supreme Mellow whiskey. The bartender, who looked like he hadn't rested for many days and had obvious dark circles under his eyes, looked at Rog, and then poured him a glass of Supreme Mellow whiskey according to his request. "What do you want information about vampires for? You're not a vampire hunter." Although he knew that Rog wasn't an ordinary person, the bartender still asked his question. "Did I say you can ask me questions?" Luo Ji's tone was very calm, but his body exuded an astonishing pressure that seemed to have materialized. Looking at Rog, who almost had the word overbearing carved on his face, the bartender wisely shut his mouth. It didn't take long for the bartender to sort out pieces of paper of different sizes from the drawer above the bar, and then put the pile of things in front of Rog. "The information you want is all here, the oldest one is from a few months ago." After that, the bartender went to the other side of the bar counter and began to clean the glass. Konoha's way of doing things, is always this overbearing? The black-clothed blade warrior asked as he sat down beside Logue. He was a vampire hunter, and the information he paid attention to was only related to vampires. When he returned to the secret base to replenish his ammunition, he recognized that Rog's uniform was the uniform of Konoha's special forces. Overbearing? This is not overbearing, this is just the basic operation of Konoha. Rog gave Blade an answer that was very in line with Konoha's style. After answering Blade, he began to look through the documents provided by the bartender. How to find the information you want from a pile of messy information is a technical work. Thanks to his previous years of detective career, Rog quickly found the information he wanted. Combined with the information revealed by the two vampires, he roughly understood the complete plan of these vampires. According to the two vampires, with the cooperation of the 8 clans, they found the whereabouts of Cain. To be precise, it should be the first city that Cain once ruled. In the legend, Cain and the first city were destroyed by Noah's flood. However, the remaining 8 clans had discovered the whereabouts of Cain and the first city from the incomplete Book of Shifting, the Vampire Holy Bible. They believed that the so-called Noah's flood, used by God to wash away the sins and decay of human beings, did not destroy the first city, nor did it eliminate Cain. The first city and Cain were merely sealed in a place where no one could ever find them. After hundreds of years of long research, they finally confirmed the location of the first city and Cain's seal. Of course, the two vampires didn't know where the sealed place was. Their status in the clan was too low, so it was impossible for them to know the exact location of the sealed land. It was said that only the 8 dukes of the 8 clans knew the specific location of the seal. Within the Blood Clan, according to the level of strength, they were divided into 5 levels: Duke, Marquis, Count, Viscount, and Baron. Although the Duke of the Blood Clan was the highest level that vampires could reach, it was not the limit of vampires. Above the Duke, there was the existence of the King of Vampires and the Ancestor. However, the King of Vampires and the Ancestor had only appeared once, so they were excluded from the ranks of the Duke. As for the so-called Prince, it did not represent the power of the Blood Clan. It was just a position, and it was not a lifelong position. In the 6 precepts of the Blood Clan's secret party, there were 2 precepts: territorial power and honored guest. The position of Prince was born from these precepts. Territorial power meant that the Blood Clan had the highest authority in their own territory, and other Blood Clans who entered the territory had to respect this authority. In the territory, the Prince was the highest ruler, and no one could go against the Prince's orders. Honored guest meant that they had to respect each other's territorial power. When a Blood Clan entered the Prince's territory, they had to meet the Prince. Without the Prince's permission, they could not do anything in the territory. Simply put, when a Blood Clan entered the Prince's territory, they had to accept the Prince's rule until they left the territory. The title of Duke represented strength, and the Prince represented status. For example, in Los Angeles, there was a Blood Clan prince who ruled Los Angeles. Although the prince was the highest ruler in the territory, there were times when the territorial power in the secret party's 6 precepts was not useful. For example, when the Duke of a clan came to the territory. No matter when, those with great power would always have some small privileges. This phenomenon was not only in the Blood Clan, but also in the human world. After browsing through all the information provided by the bartender, Rog put the pile of documents aside and said to Blade, "Are you interested in hunting the Blood Clan prince in Los Angeles together?" In a building in Los Angeles. More than 20 werewolves, more than 40 blood slaves. Is this how you guard them? Do you know that the Grand Duke will be here in a few days? A man with red eyes, wearing an expensive suit, roared at the man in front of him. This man was none other than the Blood Clan prince of Los Angeles, Jacob Luther. Jacob Luther was born in the Brooke clan, a Blood Clan count, and the current Blood Clan prince of Los Angeles. The young man standing in front of him was his descendant, Jamie Luther. If Jamie was not his only descendant, Jacob would have killed him. "Father, it's all because of the vampire hunter called Blade Warrior. He killed Brooke and the others. Someone saw him chasing after Brooke." Jamie Luther explained silently. "I don't want to know which vampire hunter did it. I just want to know how you are going to deal with this matter. The Grand Duke will be here soon, but all the sacrifices are dead. How do you want me to explain this to the Grand Duke?" The Grand Duke that Jacob was talking about was the only Blood Clan Duke of the Brooke clan, William von Bering. The Brooke clan was the most suitable clan for fighting among the Blood Clan, and William von Bering was one of the best. It could even be said that as long as the Blood Clan was not completely wiped out, William von Bering's name would definitely leave a deep mark in the history of the Blood Clan. "Forget it, you can leave." In the end, Jacob suppressed the anger in his heart and waved his hand weakly, allowing Jamie to leave his office. After Jamie left, Jacob went to the huge floor-to-ceiling window in his office and looked at the night view of Los Angeles. Jacob had spent a few months to finally capture those 20 werewolves as sacrifices. He had even sacrificed a few of his personal guards for these werewolves, and had almost started an all-out war with them. Blood Clan Duke William was going to arrive in Los Angeles in a few days, and at this critical moment, Jamie, who was in charge of guarding the werewolves and blood slaves, had actually killed them all. After all, there were still many homeless people in Los Angeles, and he could just capture some of them and turn them into blood slaves. But the problem was the werewolves. Vampire Duke William had given him a death order to capture at least 20 werewolves no matter what. Although there were still many werewolves in Los Angeles, he could not capture at least 20 werewolves in just a few days. The reason was simple. His previous capture operation had made the werewolves, who liked to form groups, even more united. Now, if he wanted to capture the werewolves, he had to start an all-out war with them. If it was in other cities, Jacob might have really risked an all-out war to capture the werewolves by force. But in Los Angeles, or rather, in the current Los Angeles, he did not dare to do so. His informant in the police had sent him a piece of bad news that he did not want to see at all. Konoha's Intelligence Bureau. The werewolf and vampire incident in Los Angeles had been reported to Konoha's Intelligence Bureau. Chapter 481. All the people and organizations in the Dark World were more or less worried about being targeted by Konoha. Although Konoha generally didn't take action against these organizations in the Dark World, as long as they were targeted by Konoha, nothing good would happen. Konoha's tyranny was not only deeply rooted in the hearts of ordinary people, but also in the Dark World. Since the establishment of Konoha, it was unknown how many organizations that didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth had been uprooted by Konoha and became a string of names in Konoha's merit book. If it wasn't to complete the task of Duke William, Jacob wouldn't violate the commandment of seclusion and take his own guards everywhere to capture those damn werewolves. Although Jacob didn't know why Grand Duke William wanted him to capture those werewolves, since it was a task personally issued by Grand Duke William, he could only bite the bullet and do it. Just as Jacob was thinking about how to catch up with the werewolves and blood slaves before Grand Duke William arrived, in the Bat Must Die bar, the Blade Warrior looked at Rog as if looking at a madman. The Vampire Prince of Los Angeles was Jacob Luther. This was known by all the vampire hunters in Los Angeles. However, no one had ever dared to have any ideas about Jacob. Jacob was the Vampire Prince of Los Angeles, which meant that he could control all the vampires in Los Angeles. In addition, Jacob's own strength was not weak. Among the vampires, although the Earl was not a high or low rank. But for those who were not vampires, a vampire Earl was equivalent to strength. Not to mention those ordinary vampire hunters, even the Blade Warrior, who was half human and half vampire, dared not say that he would be Jacob's opponent. Have you ever fought a vampire before? The Blade Warrior didn't directly refuse Rog, but instead asked Rog. No. Then do you know that Jacob is a vampire Earl? Do you know what kind of strength he has? The Blade Warrior's face sank and continued to ask. I don't know. Rog's answer was still brief. Then why do you think you can hunt Jacob? The Blade Warrior asked the last question. Obviously, he did not think that Rog had the strength to kill Jacob. Although he had been defeated by Rog not long ago, he still did not think that Rog had the strength to kill Jacob. Jacob was not one of those noob vampires in the warehouse who were only slightly stronger than normal humans. He was a true vampire warrior, a vampire count from the Brute clan. It's very simple, just because I'm Ro, just because I'm Minato. Rog almost exposed his identity, but he came back to his senses in time and reported his current identity. Minato? After hearing Rog's name, Blade showed a puzzled look. There are many powerful superheroes in Konoha, such as Abomination, Red Tank, Shockwave Girl, Quicksilver, Venom, and so on. However, Blade had never heard of a person named Namikaze Minato in Konoha. If your team is with you, you might still have a chance to kill Jacob. You alone? That's impossible, Blade said in an incomparably firm tone. He had personally experienced Rog's fighting strength, and had also seen Rog's summoning jutsu and golden bind genjutsu. But these were still not enough to convince him. From his point of view, Log was nothing more than a person with top-notch combat skills who had mastered some mysterious magic. For ordinary people, this was already considered the strength of a superhero. But to deal with the vampire Count Jacob, it was far from enough. As long as it was a vampire from the Brute clan, they basically had a good level of close combat. As for magic, there was no vampire above the Count level that couldn't do it. I can now confirm a fact, that is, people who wear sunglasses in the middle of the night have bad eyesight. Rog pointed to the sunglasses worn by Blade and said in a sarcastic tone, I'm not the opponent of a vampire Count, are you kidding me? This is an insult to me. Earth, Hell, Asgard, Warnerheim, Jotunheim, Land of Nothingness, Xander, Sokka, Hala, Symbiote Mother Planet. Wherever he went, there was no place where he didn't leave his name. But now, in an old tavern in Los Angeles, he was publicly doubted by the Blade Warrior. I thought you would be better than those vampire hunters, but I didn't expect you to be as ignorant as them. But it doesn't matter, I don't blame you. After that, Rog drank the glass of Zune May mellow whiskey in one gulp. Dare to make a bet with me, this is a commission scroll. As long as you commission me to kill Jacob, I can bring his head to you within an hour. At this time, Rog was like a demon from hell, tempting Blade. What's the bet? Although Blade felt that something was wrong, he couldn't tell what exactly was wrong. It's very simple. If I lose, you can make any conditions, even if you want Konoha to help you kill vampires. But if you lose, you have to go back to Konoha with me and cooperate with my scientists to do a little experiment. Don't worry, it won't be an inhumane experiment. At most, I'll help you do a physical examination and draw blood. Rog said the content of the bet. After he finished the bet, Blade didn't answer him, but the other vampire hunters in the bar showed a vigilant look. Konoha. This overbearing guy is actually from Konoha. When Blade asked Rog if Konoha had always been so overbearing, he deliberately lowered his voice, so no one heard their conversation except for the two of them. But now, Rog deliberately said the bet loudly so that the vampire hunters around him could hear the content of the bet. He did this, of course, not because he was bored, but because he had his own purpose. With the exception of the Blade Warrior, the vampire hunters in the bar were all trash. Rog didn't look down on their work, but simply looked down on their strength. But Blade was different. He belonged to the kind of existence with a little potential. More importantly, Konoha lacked talents like Blade. Yes, Blade was a talent. His strength, when compared to Konoha, was not outstanding. However, due to his special bloodline, he was destined to be a rare talent. Half human, half vampire, this kind of mixed bloodline sounded simple, but it was not easy to achieve at all. Perfectly combining the advantages of two bloodlines was not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Chapter 482. If Rog can study how the different bloodlines complement each other perfectly, then he can try the experiment that he wanted to do for a long time but never had the chance to do it. Commission? He didn't know why, but after seeing Rog's commission scroll, Blade suddenly felt that this Konoha's special force member, who claimed to be Minato, gave him the feeling of meeting Konoha's fourth Hokage. It is said that the fourth Hokage had obsessive-compulsive disorder when he was a private investigator. Is this a special tradition of Konoha's intelligence agency? Blade opened the blank commission scroll and carefully checked it, and this thought came to his mind involuntarily. Don't worry, I have a good reputation in the industry. By the way, I'll tell you one thing, my commission completion rate is 100%. As long as you sign the scroll, you can see Jacob's head in front of you within an hour. How about it? Simple enough. Rog knew that Blade wouldn't believe him so easily, but he wasn't worried about the final result. Is the bet the reward? After thinking about it for a few seconds, Blade asked again. No. The bet is the bet, and the reward is the reward. They are two different things. Although the bet could also be the reward, Rog didn't intend to do so. The bet was just to make Blade willing to follow him back to Konoha to do the experiment. If the bet was the reward, it would make the commission incomplete for a long time, leading him to be unable to accept other commissions before the experiment was completed. What's the reward? After hearing Rog's answer, Blade's face showed a look of vigilance. It's very simple, just help me pay for that glass of wine. Rog said a reward that was completely beyond Blade's imagination. You're not kidding me, are you? Minato, never joke about commissions. Looking at the serious expression on Roger's face, Blade finally decided to sign the commission reward. Mission details. Bring the head of vampire Count Jacob Luther to the Blade Warrior. Mission status, incomplete. Mission reward, 30 ninja coins. As Rog expected, Blade's commission successfully passed the system's judgment, and the system gave a commission reward that was not high. I'll accept your request. After receiving the commission scroll from Blade's hand, Rog glanced at the reward written on it. $20. An ordinary glass of Zune May mellow whiskey couldn't be that expensive. Strictly speaking, the reward given by Blade was already a premium. You can exchange your experience with your peers here, I'll be back soon. As soon as he finished speaking, Rog's body shone with a brilliant aurora-like light, and then he completely disappeared. At this time, Jacob couldn't have imagined that someone would pay $20 for his life. Moreover, the assassin was a ninja's killer. As the vampire prince of Los has, he has a lot of properties in Los. This unknown building is one of them. Whenever late at night, Jacob likes to hold a cup of fresh drink that has just been taken out of the girl's body, with some residual warmth, and stand alone in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, admiring the night view of Los Angeles that he never gets tired of. But tonight, Jacob obviously didn't have such leisure time. He still stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking into the distance. However, he wasn't thinking about the glory of the vampire race or his own life experiences. Instead, he was thinking about how to capture at least 20 active werewolves before the vampire Duke, Grand Duke William, arrived. Jacob would never have thought that there would be a time when he would miss these old enemies so much. If he could, he even hoped that the number of werewolves in Los Angeles could increase several times. It would be best if they were young werewolves who liked to be independent and extremely rejected group behavior. But he knew that this kind of thing could only be imagined in his mind. Although werewolves are crazier than vampires, they are not crazy to the point of being irrational. Just after Jacob sighed for who knows how many times tonight, a brilliant aurora-like light lit up 4 or 5 meters behind him. Then Rog, who still maintained the appearance of Minato, appeared in the office. Almost at the moment when the light of quantum transmission lit up, Jacob sensed the arrival of Rog. "Who are you?" Jacob exuded a fierce aura, and asked in a cold voice. "Konoha, Minato." Jacob couldn't know who Minato was, so Rog deliberately added the prefix of Konoha. Konoha. If there was anyone Jacob didn't want to see right now, it was definitely Konoha's people, even 2 places higher than Duke William. As for the second place, of course, it was his unaccomplished descendant, James, who would only cause him trouble. We vampires have never had disputes with Konoha, and we don't intend to be enemies with Konoha. With Jacob's identity, vaguely expressing concessions was the limit of what he could do. "I didn't come here for business." While answering Jacob, Rog used chakra to perceive Jacob's situation. Worthy of being a vampire count, his life force was very high. His energy intensity was also not weak, and he should be proficient in a lot of vampire magic. By perceiving Jacob's life force and energy intensity, Rog roughly judged his strength. "What do you mean?" Jacob suddenly had a bad intuition. "Someone is willing to pay for your head." "He's very willing to pay." "Note 1, Rog said casually, as if the person standing in front of him wasn't a vampire count, but a slave who couldn't resist at all. "Ha! Pay for my head. I want to know if you are qualified to take the money. Tell me, let me see how much my head is worth." Jacob made a disdainful laugh, drank the bright red liquid in the glass, and then gently put the empty glass on the desk. $20. What? Your head is only worth $20. Rog said the Blade Warrior's reward. Then he saw Jacob's pale face turn red like a drunkard's. "You are Namikaze Minato, right? Very good, you have successfully angered a vampire count. I can assure you that I will not kill you. I will turn you into the lowest blood slave, so that your soul will never rest in peace." Jacob suppressed his anger, and a cruel smile appeared on his face. "Is that so? If you can do it, I won't mind." Rog did not take Jacob's threat to heart. A vampire count's threat was not a threat at all. Just as Roger finished speaking, Jacob appeared in front of him like a ghost. Jacob's right hand, which was as white as a corpse's, turned into a sharp claw and grabbed at Roger's heart. Shadow Claw. In the face of Jacob's ferocious attack, Roger did not dodge. It was as if he could not react in time. However, just as Jacob's claw was about to touch Rog, an orange flame appeared out of thin air in front of Rog, helping him block Jacob's attack. "What is this?" The moment the orange-red flame appeared, Jacob realized that something was wrong. However, it was too late. The orange flame, which looked no different from ordinary flames, instantly swallowed his right hand. Although Jacob immediately urged the blood power in his body to protect his right hand, It did not change the fact that his right hand was quickly burned to ashes. Hellfire. As a member of the blood race, Jacob was no stranger to hellfire. Although the blood clan had a recovery ability that was far superior to that of ordinary people, this kind of extraordinary recovery ability was not always effective. For example, when facing hellfire. With his right hand burned to ashes, Jacob did not hesitate and immediately retreated, trying to open the distance between him and Rog. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. As soon as Jacob thought of retreating, Rog's right hand grabbed his neck, lifting him up. Bat incarnation. The blood power in Jacob's body surged again, and he cast one of the signature spells of the blood clan. Just as Jacob's body began to transform into numerous black bats, a ball of hellfire emerged from Log's right hand, completely enveloping Jacob's body. The black bats did not have time to take off, and they were burned to nothingness by the hellfire. You want to leave so soon? That's not good. Bat incarnation was not a spell used to attack, but it was a spell used to avoid damage or escape. Depending on the strength of the user, the number of bats they could transform into was also different. If a vampire duke was proficient in magic, it would not be difficult for him to transform into thousands of bats at once. Who the hell are you? When Log's hellfire forcefully destroyed his bat incarnation, Jacob knew that he was most likely going to be in trouble tonight. I just said, my name is Namikaze Minato. Someone offered $20 for your head, so I came here. After answering Jacob's last question, Rog did not continue to waste time on Jacob and burned his body from the neck down to ashes. The amazing vitality of the blood clan was once again reflected at this time. Even if only his head was left, Jacob still did not die immediately. If he could return to the clan's blood pool in time, he could recover with only his head left. Unfortunately, he would not have such an opportunity. Holding Jacob's head, Rog once again used quantum transmission and then completely disappeared. Chapter 483. Although hellfire doesn't have any holy attributes, it's no worse than the holy fire of heaven when used to deal with dark creatures such as vampires and werewolves. The only difference is that holy fire can purify the enemy's soul, while hellfire completely annihilates the enemy's soul. Creatures killed by hellfire won't even be qualified to go to hell. With Jacob's head, Rog teleported back to the Bat Must Die bar. The head you want, I brought it back. From Rog's disappearance to his reappearance, it was less than 5 minutes. At this time, Blade hadn't even finished his first glass of whiskey. This is Jacob? Watching Rog put Jacob's head on the bar without changing his expression, Blade showed an unbelievable look. As if to further confirm that he was not mistaken, Blade took off the black sunglasses that he would never take off even in battle. It's really Jacob. Jacob Luther, the vampire prince of Los Angeles and the vampire count of the Brook clan, was placed on the bar. Blade, who took off his sunglasses, looked at Jacob's head repeatedly for a few minutes, and finally took Jacob's head and placed it in front of him. It turned out to be you, a lowly mixed blood. Lowly mixed blood really can't come up to the table, even revenge is just a pretense. Although Jacob didn't have most of his body, the vitality of the vampire was perfectly displayed at this time, so that he still kept his mind. Revenge? After hearing Jacob's words, Rog turned his head and glanced at Blade. It turned out that they were defeated before, and judging from Jacob's performance at this time, Blade suffered a lot. I just want to end your life with my own hands. It doesn't matter to me whether I defeated you or not. The Blade warrior put on the pair of black sunglasses that never left his body and said with a cold face, I have paid for that drink for you. When the matter here is over, I will go to Konoha with you. After that, the Blade warrior casually took a rag from the bar and spread it out in a square. The original color of the rag could no longer be seen. Then, he picked up Jacob's head and put it in the center of the rag. After completely wrapping up Jacob's head, the Blade warrior took out a phone with an unknown number of buttons and put it in front of Roger. Call the number on it and you can find me. After leaving the phone, the Blade warrior picked up Jacob's head and left the bar without looking back. After Blade left, Rog opened the system and took a look. Ninja coins not consumed, 940. The commission was completed smoothly, and the system also sent the reward for the first time. Although the reward for this commission is only 30 ninja coins, Rog has no dissatisfaction. The difficulty of this commission is infinitely close to 0. It can even be said that the 30 ninja coins are free. Strictly speaking, it can't be said that it's free. After all, he still had to bear the upcoming risks, such as the revenge of the blood breeds. "Father, can I come in?" Jamie Luther, who was driven out of the office by Jacob, was like a guard at this time, holding a silver tray. In the glass on the tray, there was the blood of Jacob's favorite 16-year-old girl. After being scolded by Jacob, the more Jamie thought about it, the more he felt like he had to do something. So, he returned to his office and racked his brain to come up with a perfect plan. Of course, this perfect plan is just Jamie Luther's own idea. Although he is the only descendant of Jacob and has the strength of a vampire viscount. But ever since he was born, he had never experienced a proper battle, let alone a battle with his nemesis, the werewolves. Therefore, it was easy to imagine how perfect his perfect plan to capture the werewolves would be. "Father, I can make up the number of werewolves before Grand Duke William arrives. Can I come in and explain it to you in detail?" Jamie Luther, who didn't get a response for a long time, asked again and said his purpose. Under normal circumstances, no matter how angry Jacob was, he would let Jamie enter the office. However, after waiting patiently for a few minutes, Jamie still didn't hear Jacob's reply. If he had a little bit of experience, he would have realized that something was wrong. But this noble vampire viscount didn't react at all. He still stood at the door like a fool, waiting for Jacob's agreement. Los Angeles, Beverly Hills Hotel, 5-star suite. After the Blade Warrior left Bat Must Die, Rog also left. Bat Must Die was an old bar that didn't suit his taste. So, he came to the famous Beverly Hills Hotel and booked a 5-star suite here for a week. Beverly Hills Hotel is a famous 5-star diamond-free hotel in Los Angeles. Since it opened in 1912, it has been popular with celebrities. Business tycoons, movie stars, royal family members, leaders of various countries, and so on, have frequently visited here. Beverly Hills Hotel is located in the most famous city in Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, covering an area of about 12 acres. Not far from the hotel is the famous Wilshire Boulevard. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Rog didn't use his real identity to check in. Instead, he used a legal fake identity, specially registered by Konoha, to check in. Although the Blade Warrior's commission was completed, he didn't plan to leave Los Angeles immediately. He didn't have any conflicts with the vampires, and the vampires had always been well-behaved and abided by the commandment of seclusion. However, after knowing about Kane, the first city, and the reappearance of the glory of the vampires, he wouldn't easily leave here. It didn't matter whether the vampires provoked Konoha or not. What was important was that he was interested in the vampires. According to the 2 unlucky vampires, in order to restore the glory of the vampires, the 8 dukes of the 8 major clans used the legendary 13 sacred artifacts of the vampires. Whether the 13 sacred artifacts of the vampires were used to unlock the seal of Cain and the first city, Rog wasn't sure yet. Although the 2 vampires swore that what they said was true, considering their status in the clans, Rog felt that the authenticity of the news had yet to be confirmed. The news could be fake, but one thing was true. That was, the 13 sacred artifacts of the vampires were real. As a ninja with some strength, Rog and the father of the gods, Odin, had the same hobby. They took treasures from the enemy and put them in their own collection room. The box of ice, the eternal fire, the tesseract, and so on in the treasury of the Asgard Palace were all obtained in this way. Putting aside whether or not they could be used, just the fact that these treasures were placed there was enough to make people happy. Collector Tanya Divan was a typical example of this. And this hobby had nothing to do with the level of strength. Even ordinary people would have a similar collecting hobby. The only difference was that the items they collected were different. For example, some people like to hoard figurines, some like to hoard Lego, and some like to hoard money. While thinking about how to make the 13 sacred artifacts of the vampires his own collection, Rog took out the phone left by the Blade Warrior and took out the SIM card inside. Then, he threw this outdated phone into the trash can and inserted the phone card into the latest fruit phone. After doing this, he summoned a shadow clone and gave the special bullets he bought from Bat Must Die to the shadow clone. Since he was going to deal with the vampires, it was reasonable to prepare some weapons to deal with the vampires. When the shadow clone returned to Konoha with the silver bullets and ultraviolet bullets, Rog picked up the phone in the room and called for room service. The Beverly Hills Hotel was famous for its luxurious rooms and exemplary hotel service. Rog, who hadn't eaten for a night, certainly wouldn't let himself go to bed hungry. The next morning, Rog, who had changed into casual clothes, drove a Chevrolet SUV out of the hotel. This Chevrolet SUV wasn't a psychic one. He had rented it from the hotel. As for why he didn't drive his own sports car, the reason was simple. The place he was going to next was not suitable for a sports car. Last night, outside the secret base of the Blade Warrior, in less than 10 minutes, he met 3 waves of gangsters who tried to steal his Dodge Tomahawk. In order to avoid this kind of thing, he chose a more ordinary SUV. I don't believe that you won't even let go of a car worth tens of thousands of dollars. From the prosperous Beverly Hills Hotel all the way to the gate of the Blade Warrior's secret base, Rog once again saw the special scene of 2 worlds in one city of Los Angeles. "I'm at your door, come out." Rog didn't tell the Blade Warrior what he was going to do next. With the character of the Blade Warrior, even if he just asked him for lunch, he would bring all his weapons and equipment. A few minutes later, Rog saw the Blade Warrior, who was obviously not as energetic as last night. "Aren't you not afraid of the sun? How can this happen?" Rog asked curiously. "Not afraid doesn't mean I like it." The Blade Warrior with sunglasses answered with a blank expression. "You don't like the sun, then the vampire must dislike it even more." After that, Rog started the car and left the slum where the security environment was only a little better than Hell's Kitchen. The Blade Warrior didn't ask where Rog was going to take him. Anyway, it didn't matter where they went. However, the Blade Warrior would never have thought that the place Rog was going to take him to was the vampire's castle. Chapter 484. Rog is now going to a castle in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Strictly speaking, the castle is not located in the suburbs of Los Angeles. After all, when the castle was built, not to mention Los Angeles, even the United States of America had not been established. The United States is indeed the most powerful country in the world at present, but its history is not very long. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence was issued and the United States was officially established. The castle Rog is now going to was built at the end of the 15th century. Last night, when he was tutoring on the knowledge of vampires, Rog found a very meaningful place. Although the main country where vampires are currently active is the United States, vampires, like the current American people, are not indigenous to the North American continent. Since the 15th century, European people have migrated to the North American continent. Among them, there are vampires and werewolves, the native products of the European continent. With the development of time, the vampires in Europe declined and the vampires in North America rose, just like the European and North American continents. Now, the North American continent, which was once just a place of immigration, has become the headquarters of the vampires. What do you think of the 13 sacred artifacts of the vampires? On the way to the castle, Rog suddenly asked the blade next to him. The 13 sacred artifacts are the sacred artifacts of the 13 clans. After some clans perished, the sacred weapons that belonged to those clans also disappeared. Some vampires have tried to find these lost artifacts before, but so far, no one has heard of any artifacts being recovered. The Blade is a professional vampire hunter, and his understanding of vampires is far beyond Rog. If someone took away all the 13 sacred artifacts of the vampires, how do you think the vampires will react? Rog continued to ask. Take away the 13 sacred artifacts? The Blade froze for a moment and looked at Rog doubtfully. If it wasn't Rog who asked this question now, he would definitely think that the person who asked this question was a madman. It's impossible for this to happen. The 13 sacred artifacts are kept by different clans, and no one can defeat all the clans. Moreover, the holy weapons of some of the clans have been lost. Even those vampires don't know where they are. After a pause of 10 seconds, the Blade Warrior continued, I advise you to give up the idea of collecting the 13 sacred weapons. Konoha is indeed very powerful, but if the vampires go completely crazy, they will not be less harmful than those aliens. Blade also hoped that vampires could completely disappear from this world, but he knew that this was only a delusion. Ever since the first vampire, Cain, appeared, no matter how people dealt with these vampires, they were like malignant tumors that clung to the human world. No matter how they were killed, there was no end to them. Even the church that worshipped the Heavenly Father could not do this. Where there is a will, there is a way. If you don't try, how do you know you can't do it? Rog replied with a smile and ended the topic. For the rest of the time, Rog and Blade did not speak. Even when they took a break for lunch, they ate separately, as if they were two strangers who did not know each other at all. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Roger and the Blade Warrior finally arrived at the castle surrounded by walls. Every 10 meters or so, there were warning signs that read, Private property, no entry. This castle with 400 or 500 years of history is sitting alone on the grassland. At the gate of the castle, some modern vehicles are parked. From the outside, there is nothing wrong with this castle. It is similar to those castles that have become tourist attractions. But as long as you perceive it carefully, you will find that this castle is always exuding a cold aura like a haunted house. Even if it is now 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is at its strongest, the castle still gives people a deep chill. Don't tell me you are going to attack this castle next. The Blade Warrior turned his head and asked Logue. You already have the answer in your heart, why ask me? After that, Rog opened the door and went to the trunk. Although this car was rented from the hotel, the things in the trunk were not rented. When Rog opened the trunk, a small arsenal appeared in front of him. Daggers, katanas, grenades, pistols, rifles, grenade launchers, rocket launchers, Gatling guns. In the trunk, there are enough weapons to equip a U.S. Army combat squad. Most of these weapons were taken directly from Konoha's armory last night by the Shadow clone. Only the daggers, katanas, grenades, and bullets were processed overnight. The daggers and katanas are silver, and the bullets and grenades are also specially modified ultraviolet versions. Take whatever you like. After seeing Blade's arrival, Rog said casually. He has just perceived that there is no powerful existence in the castle, only some low-level goods. It seems that you really want to go against the vampires. Blade didn't know why Rog suddenly had the idea of killing vampires, but he knew that after today, Minato's name will definitely become the most important one on the vampires' hit list. The vampire hunters in Los Angeles have known about the existence of this castle for a long time, but this castle has always stood here. The reason is simple, there are too many vampires in the castle. For these vampire hunters, this castle is a forbidden place, and once they step into it, they will completely lose their lives. When Blade first came to Los Angeles, he had the idea of attacking this castle. However, that operation had left him with an extremely painful lesson. Other than him, none of the vampire hunters who worked with him survived. Among them, there are several people who are important to him. This was what Jacob had been talking about when he said he wanted revenge. It is the duty of Konoha's Intelligence Bureau to protect the lives of citizens. Rog gave Blade an extremely official answer. You want to go in with me, or stay here and cheer for me, you decide. After hanging all the weapons he needed on his body, Rog picked up the Gatling gun that only a true warrior can use with one hand. The Gatling gun in his right hand, and the rocket launcher in his left hand. On his back was a silver katana, and an M4A1 assault rifle loaded with an M203 grenade launcher. On his tactical vest were UV grenades and onion grenades, as well as an M17 pistol and a silver dagger. On his belt, there were 2 HKUSP pistols. After coming to the entrance of the gate, Rog jumped over the 4-meter-high gate. After watching Rog walk in without hiding, Blade hesitated for a few seconds, then followed Rog in. Although there was no one around, Rog knew that the vampires in the castle already knew of his arrival. But because it was daytime, they couldn't, openly, stop him. Although not all vampires were afraid of the sun, It was obvious that these low-level vampires in the castle had not reached the point where they could ignore the sun. After coming to a place only 30 meters away from the castle gate, Rog aimed the rocket launcher in his left hand at the castle gate and decisively pulled the trigger. Boom! A huge explosion instantly resounded through the castle, and the solid wooden gate that was several times older than him shattered. After blasting open the castle gate with a rocket, Rog did not hesitate and immediately used the body flicker technique. When he pulled the trigger of the rocket launcher, he sensed the eyes that were aimed at him. Although vampires are a very traditional race, it doesn't mean that they don't use human weapons. In the study of lethal weapons, human talent is much better than vampires. Rog, who used the body flicker technique, instantly disappeared in front of these vampires. The next second, his figure appeared in the hall of the castle. The range is the truth, the caliber is justice. Gatling gun, fearless. Rog, who entered the hall of the castle, showed a crazy smile and pulled the trigger of the Gatling gun like a devil. Chapter 485. The intense gunshots continued to sound like buzzing bees. In the silent castle hall, a symphony symbolizing death was played. Although Rog has always joked that Arhet's fists were Gatling gun techniques, he had never used the famous Gatling gun before. Today, he finally felt the unique killing charm of the Gatling gun. After he teleported into the hall of the castle, the vampires in the castle swarmed towards him like a swarm of locusts. However, these vampires that showed their fangs like ghosts were as fragile as a piece of white paper in front of the Gatling gun that used ultraviolet bullets. The 6 barrels rotated at an amazing speed, and the place where the muzzle pointed was like opening the door of death. Looking at the vampires that were hit by the ultraviolet bullets turned into ashes, Rog had a deeper understanding of the word mowing. At this time, although he was surrounded by vampires, he was not the slightest bit nervous. Instead, an untimely joke appeared in his mind. Since the invention of the machine gun, the nomad's racial specialty changed from riding and shooting to being able to sing and dance. Under the frenzied fire of the Gatling gun, it didn't take long for him to wipe out the most numerous and weakest small fry vampires in the castle. After emptying all the bullets of the Gatling gun, Rog put aside the hot barrel of the Gatling gun and picked up the M4A1 assault rifle on his back. After loading the M4A1 and loading a grenade into the grenade launcher, he ignored the blade warrior who had just arrived in the hall and walked directly into the castle. The vampires in the hall could only be regarded as an appetizer. The real main course had not yet been served. He didn't know if the vampires had the habit of closing the door, or if it was because of his arrival that all the doors of the castle were closed. He was soon blocked by a door in the side hall. A solid wooden door with a long history. At this time, Rog did not have the idea of protecting the antique and directly launched the grenade. Boom! The solid wooden door shattered, and large and small pieces scattered on the ground. Unlike the main hall, there weren't many vampires in the side hall. Moreover, unlike the vampires in the hall that only pounced on him like wild beasts, the vampires in the side hall were obviously much more advanced. They wore the same dark red uniform and held various cold weapons that looked like antiques in their hands. If it was any other time, Rog wouldn't mind playing with these swordsman-like vampires. But now, he had no such intention. Although he was carrying a silver katana on his back, he wasn't going to use it to deal with these vampires who looked like guards. Thus, he made a move that suited his current image. Aim, fire, all in one go. Although he hadn't undergone professional shooting training, it didn't mean that his shooting skills were bad. On the contrary, his shooting skills could even be considered quite good. He could even play with shurikens, a throwing weapon, to the point of perfection. Of course, a mere firearm would not be a problem for him. Bang bang bang, bang bang bang, bang bang bang. At this time, Rog did not use burst fire. Instead, he switched the safety on the rifle to triple burst mode. Note 1, using hot weapons to bully cold weapons was not a very fair thing in the first place. Especially now, the people with hot weapons were far stronger than the people with cold weapons. The result was obvious: hot weapons were superior to cold weapons. Although these vampires wanted to rely on the high agility of the Blood Clan to quickly approach Rog, They were killed by Rog, who used Mozambique shooting technique before they could get close. The Mozambique shooting technique was a shooting technique that he had learned from movies. Strictly speaking, it couldn't be regarded as learning. He just opened his 3-tomo Sharingan and watched it for a while. Mozambique shooting technique, simply put, was to shoot the target's body twice, and then shoot the target's head once. The principle of this shooting technique was very simple, that is, the body was hit the largest area, and it was the easiest to hit. Shooting at the body first can effectively reduce the target's mobility, and then shoot the head to completely kill the target. In game terms, it was a hard hit first, and then a critical hit. After easily killing the 7 vampire guards with Mozambique shooting technique, Rog took out the unfinished magazine and replaced it with a full magazine. He knew that the bullets in the magazine were not finished, but he couldn't change the habit of reloading cancer in the game. Since he couldn't change it, then he wouldn't change it. There were many players who had reloading cancer like him. People like them, as long as there was a little gap, they would unconsciously reload. Although this would lead to an accident of being killed by the enemy when reloading, a full magazine could provide them with a sense of security and satisfaction. However, other people's reloading cancer only appeared in the game. There were not many people who brought this habit to the real world except him. After reloading, he did not stop and continued to walk inside the castle. Bang 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 bang, boom. Boom, intermittent gunshots and explosions sounded in the castle. Rog was like a special forces member who was clearing out terrorists, one room after another. Although his speed was not fast, his clearing efficiency was not low at all. Up until now, none of the vampires that had appeared in his line of sight had been able to leave his sight alive. Click click click. Because of the wasteful behavior of reloading cancer, Rog quickly used up all the rifle magazines on him. After throwing away the M4A1 that was out of bullets, he also threw away the remaining grenades. Then he pulled out the 2 HKUSP pistols on his belt. Although the firepower of pistols was not as good as rifles, it was more than enough to deal with these low-level vampires. Bang bang, bang bang bang, bang. As he continued to go deeper into the castle, the vampires he encountered became more and more powerful. The vampires in the hall, as long as they were hit by the ultraviolet bullets, their entire body would turn into ashes. When he reached the side hall, the ultraviolet bullets could only turn the body parts of the vampire guards into ashes. Now, the power of the ultraviolet bullets was almost the same as the effect of ordinary bullets on humans. If he continued to develop at this pace, it would not be long before he encountered vampires who were not afraid of the ultraviolet bullets at all. Is there no one among you who knows magic? You are vampires born with long lives. Is there no one who is aggressive? While killing these vampires with pistols, Rog calmly said to the vampires who were besieging him. Although there were many vampires present, none of them answered his question. The only thing these vampires could do was to attack him with the weapons in their hands, or aim and shoot at him. Shoot. When he came to the second floor of the castle, he finally encountered vampires who knew how to use firearms. Unlike him who used ultraviolet bullets, these vampires used silver bullets. It could be seen from the bullets that these firearms were not prepared for him, but specially prepared for the werewolves. However, these vampires could not be blamed. They would never have thought that the one who attacked their castle was not the werewolves they imagined, but a human who was equivalent to food in their eyes. Relying on more powerful firepower, these vampires temporarily stopped Rog's advance. Sigh, why bother? Rog, who was leaning against the wall, sighed helplessly, and then used a ninjutsu that he had not used for a long time. Raiton, Thundercoat Armor. Thundercoat Armor was a Raiton defensive ninjutsu that he developed after studying Electric Man Max in detail. The principle of defense was very simple. It was to use a powerful electric net that could decompose metal to defend against attacks from all sides. Of course, in the process of defense, it also involved the use of some electromagnetic force. After using Thundercoat Armor, Rog directly came in front of these vampires and aimed the pistol at them. These vampires certainly would not be stupid to let Rog attack them. Almost at the moment when Rog came out, they pulled the trigger. Zzzzz easy. The silver bullets used to deal with the werewolves flew in front of Rog without any suspense, causing a circle of ripples in front of him. Under the gaze of those vampires, these silver bullets were quickly decomposed by the transparent layer of Thundercoat, and then completely dissipated. While using Thundercoat armor for defense, Rog was not idle, and sent the ultraviolet bullets from the pistol into the forehead of these vampires. After killing all the vampires on the second floor, he took the remaining ultraviolet grenades and onion grenades, as well as the silver katana and silver dagger to the third floor. This castle only had 3 floors, and this was his last stop. After dealing with the vampires here, he could return to Los Angeles to enjoy a delicious dinner at the Beverly Hills Hotel. The number of vampires on the third floor was far less than the first and second floors, but their life signal strength was far stronger than the vampires on the 2 floors below. If nothing unexpected happened, he should be able to meet a vampire who can use magic here. Compared with the 2 floors below, the environment on the third floor was relatively less gloomy, and the light was more abundant. Just as Rog was considering whether to throw out the ultraviolet grenades and onion grenades, a noble-looking vampire appeared in front of him. Just by looking at the appearance, this was a slender and handsome vampire. If you ignore the blood on his mouth and hands, and the girl lying not far from him, with bite marks on her neck and completely dead, he should be the perfect lover in the eyes of many women. Chapter 486. Her white dress was stained with blood, and her messy blonde hair was spread out. Her eyes were wide open, and her face was filled with horror. The girl's fear before her death was vividly displayed. Although Rog didn't have any personal grudges with vampires, there was one thing that he hated. Although vampires needed to consume blood to survive, he hated the way vampires treated humans as playthings. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. In order to survive, it was understandable for vampires to consume human blood. But there were some vampires that consumed blood not to survive, but to satisfy their own perverted desires. For example, they enjoyed the fear and panic of humans when death approached, and used the insignificance of humans to contrast their strength and superiority, thus obtaining pleasure. You were able to come here under the siege of those trash. You have the qualifications to be my descendant. Kneel down and submit to me. I, Alexander Christ, will grant you eternal life. The vampire named Alexander opened his arms and spoke to Rog in an exaggerated tone, as if a superior emperor was bestowing a gift to a commoner. Idiot. Rog's answer to Alexander's suggestion was abnormally simple. After he finished speaking, he ignored Alexander's increasingly cold eyes and directly removed the last few ultraviolet grenades and onion grenades from his tactical vest. Ignorant human, you know what you rejected. Just as Alexander Christ was about to let Rog understand what he rejected, 2 ultraviolet grenades with the safety pins removed flew in front of him. Behind the 2 ultraviolet grenades, there was an onion grenade. The onion grenade wasn't a grenade made of onions, but a tactical grenade filled with onion extract. For example, the common flash grenades, smoke grenades, and so on were tactical grenades. Boom, 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 3 consecutive explosions rang out, and the originally quiet third floor of the castle instantly became lively. The power and impact of the explosion wasn't small, but it didn't cause any damage to Alexander. Before the grenades exploded, Alexander's body disappeared like an illusory shadow, completely disappearing in front of Rog. Shadow jump. Using the power of shadows, Alexander disappeared from where he stood and suddenly appeared behind Rog. Just as Alexander, whose mouth and hands were stained with the girl's blood, was about to use his sharp right claw to pierce through Rog's heart, a silver-white dagger appeared in front of him at an unimaginable speed and stabbed into his right eye. Ah! The excruciating pain from his right eye made Alexander scream uncontrollably. He struggled to retreat. Did you know that I rarely kill my enemies in battle? And you just so happen to have the qualifications. After blinding Alexander's right eye with the silver dagger, Rog slowly turned around and said coldly, "Kneel down and beg. Beg me to mercifully end your life." As he spoke, Rog took off the silver katana on his back and looked at Alexander as if he was looking at an ant. Ha! Interesting, interesting. Alexander didn't expect Rog to return the words he had just said. Laughing wildly, Alexander pulled out the silver dagger that was stabbed into his right eye and licked the blood on the dagger. Come, let me see how you're going to end my life. Under the nourishment of the power of blood, Alexander's pierced right eye quickly recovered. Within a few seconds, his right eye returned to its original state, as if everything before was just an illusion. The vampire's recovery was originally very good, and Alexander was one of the best. Unlike the vampires who pursued physical strength and magical power, Alexander didn't choose the two most stable paths. Regeneration. On the basis of the vampire's amazing recovery, he pursued an immortal regenerative ability. Alexander's choice was very unconventional, but he relied on this unconventional choice to walk his own path. Relying on this obsessive pursuit, Alexander was promoted from an ordinary vampire to an earl, and even received the title of Alexander the Immortal among the vampires. If you don't go crazy, you won't live. Alexander Christ was a typical representative of this philosophy. Rog ignored Alexander's maniacal laughter and shifted his gaze to Alexander's limbs. The best way to communicate with a perverted vampire like Alexander was not words, but violence. Thus, when Alexander opened his mouth and laughed wildly, Rog directly launched an attack. Body flicker. The shadow leap that Alexander just used was not bad, but for Rog, who was used to high-speed combat, it was nothing. The speed that Alexander just displayed didn't even make him interested in using lightning body flicker. Before Alexander's laughter stopped, Rog was already in front of him. Then, a silver arc flashed across Alexander's sight. Before Alexander could react, his right hand holding the silver dagger was completely separated from his body. After chopping off Alexander's right hand, Roger did not stop what he was doing. He continued to wield the silver katana. Left hand, right foot, left foot. In less than 3 seconds, Alexander's limbs were all removed by Rog. Bright red blood splashed out from the wounds on his limbs, and Alexander fell back uncontrollably. However, Rog's attack still didn't stop. Before Alexander's body fell to the ground, the silver katana slashed across his chest again and again, cutting the clothes on his upper body into pieces. As the pieces of clothes fluttered like fallen leaves, the wound on Alexander's chest was fully revealed. Rog didn't use the katana to write on Alexander's body, but used the sharp blade to draw a bloody hexagram. After doing all this, he summoned a small cluster of hellfire to his left hand and let the hellfire burn on the middle finger of his left hand. Alexander didn't expect Rog's attack to come so quickly. It was indeed painful to have his limbs cut off, but it couldn't suppress the shock in his heart. "Who are you?" Alexander, who was cut into a human stick, shouted in horror. Rog didn't answer his question, but slowly came to him with the katana that was still dripping with blood, waiting for him to recover. Alexander's terrifying regenerative ability, which he obtained with all his might, was once again reflected at this time. Under Rog's gaze, his limbs began to recover quickly. However, just as Alexander's limbs were about to recover, Rog once again waved the katana in his hand. Chi. It was another 4 slashes, and Alexander's limbs were once again separated from him. "Who are you?" Alexander asked Rog loudly again. Rog still didn't answer, but at the moment Alexander finished speaking, he flicked the small cluster of hellfire on his left middle finger. The hellfire bullet, which was only the thickness of a finger, hit Alexander's chest like a bullet, and then ignited the blood on Alexander's chest like igniting oil, igniting the hexagram cut out by the katana. "Ah!" Alexander screamed again. The burning hellfire on his chest not only brought him extreme pain, but also completely disrupted his control of the power of blood. Just now he seemed to have lost control, but in fact he was secretly mobilizing the power of blood in his body, trying to cast magic to completely get away from Rog. But his plan had just begun, and it was seen through by Rog. Looking at Alexander, who was rolling on the ground and constantly screaming, Rog's face didn't change. Torturing the enemy to death is not a praiseworthy thing. Similarly, playing with human life with self-righteous arrogance is not a praiseworthy thing. Defeating Alexander, Rog wasn't dissatisfied at all. But he didn't do that, because he wanted to let this self-righteous vampire feel the despair experienced by the humans who were played to death by him. He wasn't fighting Alexander as Konoha's Minato, but as a human to avenge Alexander. Alexander, the vampire count's screams lasted for more than 5 minutes before they gradually grew softer. Then they stopped. The silver katana was inserted into Alexander's head and nailed him to the ground like a worm. Rog walked toward the other rooms on the 3rd floor. A few minutes later, Rog, who sent all the vampires on the 3rd floor of the castle to hell, returned to the gate of the castle that was blown up by the rocket. All done. The Blade Warrior, dressed in black, was leaning against the wall next to the door, holding a cigar of unknown brand in his hand. Of course. Rog simply replied, then turned to look at the castle where there were no vampires. Aren't you going to deal with it? After taking a deep breath of the cigar, the Blade Warrior pointed to the surveillance cameras next to the gate. I killed so many of their people, I have to leave them a target for revenge, otherwise, it would be too unreasonable. Rog came with the idea of completely offending the vampires from the beginning. Otherwise, how could he wait for the revenge of those vampires? Without these vampires, he couldn't get the collection he wanted. After returning to Los Angeles, help me spread the news that you and a man named Namikaze Minato have joined forces to eliminate all the vampires in the castle. Before driving away from the castle, Rog deliberately said to the Blade Warrior, "Do you still care about this reputation?" "No, I just hope that those vampires can find me faster." Chapter 487. Although he was driving back to Los Angeles, Rog didn't drive all the way back like he did when he came. Instead, he used quantum teleportation and teleported himself and the car directly back to Los Angeles. After sending Blade back to his secret base in the slums, he drove the rented SUV back to the Beverly Hills Hotel. Before returning to the car, he didn't forget to deal with the weapons in the trunk. In the next few days, he enjoyed the decadent life of a rich man in the Beverly Hills Hotel and patiently waited for the revenge of the vampires. The most important stronghold in the Los Angeles area was uprooted. Unless the vampires didn't know the news, they would definitely carry out bloody revenge. Vampires were a very prideful race. They had a longer lifespan than humans, and they also had a higher self-esteem than humans. However, what Rog didn't expect was that after enjoying the decadent life of a rich man in the Beverly Hills Hotel for a few days, the first thing he waited for was not the revenge of the vampires, but the vampires' archenemy, the werewolves. Beverly Hills Hotel, Polo Lounge. "Mr. Minato, hello, my name is Henry." Just as Rog was tasting the specialty cocktails in this famous Polo Lounge, a rugged man who didn't fit in with the Polo Lounge came to him and introduced himself in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. "We don't know each other, right?" Rog looked up at Henry, who was wearing a brown sheepskin jacket and light blue jeans, and asked in confusion. He didn't sense a vampire's aura on Henry, who was well built. "Today is the first time we meet, can I sit here?" Unlike his rugged appearance, Henry, who took the macho route, showed politeness that didn't match his image. "Sit down." When Henry sat down, Rog used chakra to sense his life force. "This is a werewolf?" On Henry, he perceived a life signal that was completely different from that of humans. "I took the liberty to come here today. I hope Mr. Minato doesn't mind." The rugged Henry continued, then turned his head and glanced around. "I don't mind. Tell me, what do you want from me?" Although he had never seen a werewolf before, he was certain that Henry was a werewolf. "I heard a few days ago that Minato-san went to a vampire's lair with a vampire hunter called Blade Warrior, so if Minato-san doesn't mind, I hope to get some small help from you." After saying that, Harry raised his right hand slightly, and his right hand, which was no different from a normal person's, changed rapidly. Gray hair quickly grew out of his palms, and his white fingernails began to grow thicker and longer, finally turning into claws. Henry maintained the werewolf's right claw for a few seconds and then quickly changed back to his human right hand. To be able to control parts of his body to transform, this werewolf was quite interesting. Although Rog had never dealt with werewolves before, it didn't mean that he knew nothing about them. Werewolves and vampires were both dark creatures. There was a lot of information about werewolves in Kamartaj's library. However, Kamarj didn't attack these werewolves and vampires. She just registered them in detail like a zookeeper. Kamartaj wasn't particularly concerned about the native creatures of the earth. As long as these native creatures didn't contact some evil existences from other dimensions or try to set off a magical apocalypse on the earth, Kamartaj generally wouldn't do anything. Otherwise, these vampires and werewolves wouldn't have lived to this day. Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One wasn't someone that these vampires and werewolves could compete with. If you want help, why don't you go to the vampire hunters? As far as I know, vampire hunters don't reject working with werewolves. You have the same enemy, and you have cooperated with each other before. It wasn't impossible for vampire hunters to cooperate with werewolves. Vampire hunters were just a small branch of the demon hunters. Because they only targeted vampires, they were called vampire hunters. Although werewolves were also dark creatures, they belonged to the category of monsters. But werewolves were not in the scope of vampire hunters' work. Although this was not in line with the professional ethics of demon hunters were originally a neglected profession, and there was no such thing as a demon hunter guild. Therefore, the demon hunters also turned a blind eye to the cooperation between vampire hunters and werewolves. As long as they didn't cooperate under the eyes of the demon hunters didn't bother to pay attention to them. They are not strong enough. They don't even have the strength to deal with the vampire earl, so they can't help us. Obviously, this Henry did some homework before coming over. Tell me about your plan, but I can't guarantee that I will agree. Rog took a sip of the Polo Lounge's specialty cocktail and said slowly, "Those vampires plan to rescue their ancestors from the sealed land. Our plan is very simple, that is, to completely destroy their plan. Mr. Minato, you should also know that although we werewolves have gotten rid of the vampires' slavery, the strength of our race is always weaker than theirs. So if you don't mind, I hope you can join us in our plan." Henry gave a simple explanation. It was not a secret that the vampires were trying to let Cain and the First City return to the world. Even Rog, an outsider, could find out about it. Of course, the werewolves could also find out about it. It was normal for Henry to want to stop the vampires' plan. But the problem was he didn't feel the need to help the werewolves. Before Rog could refuse, Henry continued, "Mr. Minato, you can rest assured that this plan will not let you do it for free. As far as I know, Mr. Minato, you've been interested in the vampire's 13 sacred weapons recently. I happen to have a few in my hands. I wonder if you're interested in taking a look." After saying that, Henry took out 4 photos from his pocket and handed them to Rog. Rog took the photos from Henry and glanced at them casually. Bone harp, butcher's knife, ghost lantern, poison bottle. I wonder if these 4 sacred weapons can meet your needs. While Rog was browsing through the photos, Henry said the names of the 4 sacred weapons in the photos. "It seems that the vampires and others have underestimated you. No wonder the vampires haven't been able to find these lost sacred weapons." Although Rog didn't know how Henry found these sacred weapons, he was quite satisfied with the reward that Henry gave. Chapter 488. Although Harry had only taken out the photos of the 4 holy weapons, there were only 5 blood-breed clans that had perished. This also meant that only 1 saint artifact was still missing. If he could get his hands on the remaining 8 sacred artifacts of the Blood Kindred, it would be no different from gathering all 13 of the Blood Kindred's sacred artifacts. For sacred tools of the vampire clan, you should not just want to stop the plan of the vampire clan, right? If it was just to stop the vampire clan, Henry didn't need to pay such a huge price. Although the 13 sacred tools were only the sacred tools of the vampire clan, they were also of great value to the werewolves who were also dark creatures. Stopping those blood-sucking bastards is our main purpose. In addition, we hope Minato-san can help introduce us to Fenrir? Fenrir? Rog was not surprised that Henry knew about his relationship with Konoha. In Bats Must Die, he deliberately revealed this, so it was not strange that Henry knew about it. But what he didn't expect was that Henry's additional request was to see Fenrir. Introducing Fenrir is not a problem, but I want to know why you want to see him. Although Fenrir was also a wolf, his wolf was completely different from Henry's wolves. Fenrir was a native demon wolf of Asgard. Although he looked very similar to the wolves on Earth, when it came to genes and lineage, Henry's werewolves were more similar to baboons than to Fenrir. This is the case, Minato-san. You also know that vampires have a common ancestor, Cain. Although the history of werewolves is not shorter than that of vampires, unfortunately, we still don't know where we came from. Some people say that the ancestor of werewolves was an ordinary person who was bitten by a wolf. Some people say that our ancestor was an out-of-control magician who studied black magic in ancient times. Some people say that our ancestors were a group of sinners cursed by God and could only survive in a half-human, half-beast state. Where we werewolves were born is a part of the fog of history that cannot be investigated. But Fenrir's appearance gave us hope. Fenrir's appearance is definitely not a coincidence. His existence may be able to solve this mystery that has troubled our people for countless years. Harry didn't hide anything and told him the whole story. Through Fenrir, the mystery of the birth of werewolves was solved. It had to be said that werewolves like Henry were quite imaginative. Fenrir's appearance was indeed not a coincidence. It was because he had revived Fenrir and brought him back to Earth. However, this had nothing to do with what Henry wanted to know. Fenrir was not a creature from Earth. It was definitely not what Henry and the others had imagined. Just as Rog was about to use practical actions to tell Henry what it means to be an honest and trustworthy ninja with good morals, he suddenly thought of a problem. Wait a minute. It didn't seem impossible. Although Rog did not know when Fenrir was born, from Hela's age, Fenrir could have appeared on Earth more than 2,600 years ago and left behind some impulsive products. Could it really be such a coincidence? After thinking of this, Rog's eyes looking at Henry became a bit strange. Should I take a little blood from Henry and let number 2 analyze it? It's not impossible for you to meet Fenrir, but I want to ask a digression. If you find out that Fenrir really has something to do with the origin of werewolves, what will you do? This was what Rog was very curious about. Although the nobles in Europe liked to find some famous ancestors for themselves, as far as he knew, werewolves didn't have this hobby. If Fenrir really has something to do with our ancestors, or is the origin of our werewolves, we will certainly treat him in a way that is consistent with his status. Henry didn't say how he would treat Fenrir, but gave a seemingly flawless answer. I will tell Fenrir about this, but I can't guarantee that he will come to see you. After all, he has just entered Konoha. Rog gave an answer that was very consistent with his current identity. He was now Rog, not the director of Konoha's intelligence agency. He couldn't promise. Although he said that was not what he was thinking at the moment. Fenrir, whether or not your future dog food can be doubled depends on whether or not you made some mistakes that young wolves should make when you were young. No problem, this is my contact information. If there is any progress, you can contact me at any time. After that, Henry took out a business card with only a phone number and handed a document to Rog. This is some information about the butcher's knife and other sacred weapons. Minato-san, you can browse it if you have time. After handing the business card and the document to Rog, Henry left the polo lounge that didn't match his temperament at all. When Henry's figure completely disappeared in the lounge, Rog put away the smile on his face and became very serious. Henry's performance just now was indeed very polite, but Rog could see that Henry didn't say a word about what he really wanted. Stopping the Blood Clan or seeing Fenrir was not Henry's ultimate goal. Even if Fenrir was really the source of the werewolf, Henry would never treat Fenrir as an ancestor. Although the time of contact was not long, he could be 100% sure that Henry was a very ambitious werewolf. Henry wanted to use his power to stop the Blood Clan's plan, which was very reasonable. It was not particularly strange that he wanted to see Fenrir. Including the statement he gave, it was also very reasonable. But the problem was that these two things should not happen at the same time. The news that Fenrir was in Konoha was known all over the world. The werewolves wanted to confirm whether Fenrir had anything to do with their ancestor. There was plenty of time, and there was no need to stop the Blood Clan at this critical time. But Henry just had to deal with these two things together, which was very problematic. Stopping the Blood Clan was not something that one or two werewolves could do, so Henry would definitely summon a large number of werewolves, and it was not impossible to call all the werewolves in the United States. The gathered werewolves could be soldiers to stop the Blood Clan, and they could also become spectators to witness the birth of a great leader. If Rog guessed correctly, Henry's plan should be like this. In the name of stopping the Blood Clan, all the werewolves in the United States were gathered together. Then, before setting out to stop the Blood Clan, he would first say his guess about Fenrir in public. Of course, his statement could not be agreed by all the werewolves, but as long as a small number of werewolves agreed, it was enough. If there was not even a small number of werewolves, it didn't matter. He could let a few men who did not belong to his side on the surface to do it. Although he did not know what method Henry would use to confirm the relationship between Fenrir and the werewolves, this was not the point. If Fenrir was really the source of the werewolves, then Henry would be the greatest contributor to finding the ancestor of the werewolves. If not, he could immediately change his tone. No matter what he used next, the werewolves were different from the cowards like the vampires. They did not need the protection of the ancestor to be as powerful. Or he could use the reason that the ancestor of the Blood Clan was about to return, but there was still no news of the ancestor of the werewolves. He could encourage the werewolves, who were already in a disadvantageous position, to fight to the death. This would allow him to gain unprecedented prestige among the werewolves. At that time, as long as he slightly pretended to take the lead, there would be a large group of werewolves with blood in their heads rushing to the Blood Clan regardless of their own safety. As for whether he could successfully stop the Blood Clan, this was not important. Whether he succeeded or failed, Henry would become the leader of the werewolves on the surface. If he succeeded, he could take the opportunity to integrate the entire werewolves. If he failed, he could also use this as an excuse to encourage the werewolves to form the same structure as the Blood Clan. As long as a clan or similar organization appeared among the werewolves, Henry could rely on the previous operation of finding the ancestor of the werewolves and leading the organization of the Blood Clan to successfully ascend to the position of the ruler. At that time, he would no longer be the leader on the surface, but the king of the werewolves in the true sense. Fenrir and other werewolves were just Henry's chess pieces. Even Rog was just a small chess piece in his calculations. As long as Henry could gather the three elements of the werewolves, Fenrir, and the Blood Clan, no matter how things developed in the end, he would be the biggest winner. Judging from the current situation, except for the element of Fenrir, which he could not determine for the time being, he already had the other two elements. Although these were only his own guesses at present, Rog believed that his guesses were correct. When he sensed Henry's life force, he found that Henry's life force was far stronger than that of the Blood Clan Count. If Henry really cared about the future of the werewolves as much as he showed, he should have come to Los Angeles to rescue his compatriots when Jacob captured the other werewolves, instead of waiting until Jacob died and the castle stronghold in the suburbs of Los Angeles was also uprooted before appearing in Los Angeles. And Rog now had reason to suspect that Henry's plan was temporarily made by him. Because he knew that a member of Konoha named Namikaze Minato suddenly fought with the Blood Clan, he made a plan that included Fenrir. Of course, it was also possible that Henry had a similar plan early on, but because of the appearance of Namikaze Minato, he slightly adjusted the plan. After all, Namikaze Minato came from Konoha, and Konoha just had a prehistoric giant wolf Fenrir that suddenly appeared. Chapter 489. Outside the Beverly Hills Hotel. Sir, are we really going to give the 4 sacred tools to this guy named Namikaze Minato? This is a treasure that our people have spent hundreds of years and countless manpower and resources to obtain. Wouldn't it be too much of a loss to give them away? In the latest dark green Bentley SUV, the young man sitting in the driver's seat said to Henry in the back seat. Of course, it's a loss to give them away, but as long as we don't give them away, we won't lose. The current Henry was a completely different person compared to when he was in the Polo Lounge. The kind and friendly expression completely disappeared, replaced by a face full of arrogance. Isn't this not good? After all, Namikaze Minato is from Konoha. The young man who was the driver asked doubtfully. Although Konoha was just a new organization that was established a few years ago, in the Dark World, there was such a saying. Even if we are enemies with the US military and the Restoration Alliance at the same time, we will never become Konoha's enemy. After all, the US military and the Restoration Alliance wouldn't do such a thing. But Konoha was completely different. If they were enemies with Konoha, not to mention their relatives and friends, even their neighbor's dog would be in danger. Konoha's overbearingness wasn't expressed with words, but with bloody records. Namikaze Minato is Namikaze Minato, and Konoha is Konoha. Offending Namikaze Minato doesn't mean offending Konoha. Although Henry had enough power to compete with the Vampire Dukes, and was one of the highest-ranking alpha wolves in the Wolf Clan, he didn't underestimate Konoha. Konoha's anger wasn't something an alpha wolf like him could withstand. Even if the entire Wolf Clan gathered together, they may not be able to withstand Konoha's anger. Don't worry, although Namikaze Minato is a member of Konoha, his status is not high. If I'm not wrong, he should just be a mid-level member. If Namikaze Minato was just a civilian, Henry might be worried about whether he was an important member of Konoha. But obviously, Namikaze Minato was just a soldier. Konoha's important combatants had a very obvious characteristic, that was, they had enough fame. For example, Punisher, Abomination, Shockwave Girl, Quicksilver, Venom, etc. Harry had never heard of Minato in Konoha, so he could conclude that Minato was just an ordinary member of Konoha's fighting force. At most, he would be a captain or something. It was because he was convinced of this that he dared to include Minato in his calculations. Let's drive, we still have a lot of things to do. Henry said to the young man who was the driver. Yes, sir. Not long after, the dark green Bentley SUV quickly disappeared at the end of the street. I gave you such an important mission, and this is how you do things. In Jacob's office, a man in an expensive classical suit said to a trembling James Luther. From his appearance, this man was only in his early 40s and was in the prime of his life. However, those who knew him knew that his real age was at least 10 times his appearance. The man who made James Luther tremble was none other than the only Duke of the blood race's Brooke clan, William von Balen. Grand Duke, this was an accident. Father prepared enough werewolves and blood slaves early in the morning. It's all the fault of the mad dog called Blade Warrior. He killed all the werewolves and blood slaves. Vampire was a derogatory term for the blood race. The blood race itself didn't call themselves that. Similarly, the blood race didn't call Blade Warrior and others vampire hunters. Instead, they called them mad dogs. Because only a mad dog would bite people for no reason. What I want to hear is not an excuse. All I know now is that you didn't prepare the werewolves and blood slaves, and you allowed 2 mad dogs to break into the castle and slaughter our people. Although Grand Duke William's tone was calm, in James Luther's ears, it was no different from the whispers of death. Don't look at Grand Duke William's polite appearance now, this demeanor showed that he wanted to kill. Grand Duke, this is really not our fault. We had no way to stop them. Father and Alexander were killed by the man called Namikaze Minato. We can't find anyone stronger than Father and Alexander. Although his voice was trembling slightly, James Luther still didn't forget to throw all the blame to Namikaze Minato. And Namikaze Minato is still a member of Konoha. We don't dare to take revenge easily, for fear of causing Konoha's dissatisfaction. Jamie Luther added another excuse. After hearing the word Konoha, Grand Duke William's face became dignified. The higher the strength and status, the more one could understand the horror of Konoha. Like Henry, Grand Duke William didn't want to fight with Konoha. If possible, Grand Duke William even hoped that the blood race could reach some friendly cooperation with Konoha. I will deal with Namikaze Minato personally. As for the other mad dogs, I don't want to hear about them in Los Angeles. Grand Duke William finally made a decision and ordered James. I don't know how Jacob became a prince. In the entire Los Angeles area, there are only 2 counts. This is simply nonsense. My personal guards will assist you. If you can't achieve your goal, you don't have to come back. After saying that, Grand Duke William waved his hand impatiently and let James leave the office. Namikaze Minato. Konoha. Just as Wolf King Henry and Grand Duke William were both thinking about how to deal with Namikaze Minato, Rog directly teleported from the 5-star suite of the Beverly Hills Hotel to Konoha's headquarters. In the completely renovated hangar, he saw Fenrir lying on the ground as well as Abomination, Red Tank, and Black gathered together. Perhaps it was because of their extraordinary physiques, Fenrir became good friends with Xiao Hei and the other two. They would often gather together when they had nothing to do. Of course, because they were not of the same race, the only entertainment they had when they got together was fighting and eating. Whoa! Fenrir was the first person to discover Rog's arrival. Before Rog's figure appeared at the hangar gate, Fenrir discovered his arrival and greeted Rog in his own way. Hokage-sama. Red Tank and Abomination, who were barbecuing meat, immediately stood up and saluted when they noticed Log's arrival. As for Black at this time, he was like a pool of slime, paralyzed on Fenrir's head. He casually transformed a black arm and waved at Rog as a greeting. "Give me a copy too, slightly spicy." Glancing at the barbecued chicken wings and roast beef in the hands of Red Tank and Abomination, Rog said. Then, he came in front of Fenrir and looked at Fenrir and Black on his head. At this time, he discovered that Black was not paralyzed on Fenrir's head, but symbiotic on Fenrir's body. "It seems that you finally chose a host. Not bad, you are no longer alone." Rog was not surprised that Black was parasitizing on Fenrir. Although Black was a symbiotic demon weapon he created by imitating the Black Death Sword, Black was still a symbiotic demon after all, so it was not particularly strange that he embarked on the same path as Venom. As for why Black chose Fenrir as a host, it was easy to understand. As a symbiotic demon with strength far beyond the Lord level, Black has his own pride. Ordinary creatures, he doesn't even look at them. Although Fenrir was not a human, he was an out-and-out powerful demon wolf. Choosing Fenrir as a host can be regarded as a strong alliance and mutual achievement. It can't be helped. Who told you not to be parasitized by me? I am also one of the top existences in the symbiotic demon clan, but in the end, I have fallen to the point of being abandoned by my master. Black said in a resentful tone. If someone didn't know the details, they would definitely think that Rog did something to him. I told you before that I don't want you to be a parasite. It's not that I dislike you, but I can't accept being hung on by a male creature. Symbiotic demons have no gender distinction. If you like, I can become someone else, just like now. At this time, Black completely transformed his voice into the voice of an Earth woman and deliberately used a coquettish tone. "No need, you should stay with Fenrir. Fenrir is also good." After speaking, Rog patted Fenrir's huge head. "Yes, I think so too." Just when Rog thought that Fenrir would answer him with a whimper like before, Fenrir suddenly spoke in pure English, with a magnetic voice unique to a mature man. Damn! The moment Fenrir spoke, Rog was stunned. What's going on? The demon wolf Fenrir actually spoke English. The symbiotic demon gives its host an insignificant ability. "If you like, I can also let you have such a voice." Blackie explained with a proud look on his face. "I still prefer my own voice." Rog didn't even think about it and directly rejected Black's good intentions. Accepting the parasitism of the symbiotic demon could indeed strengthen his body. However, this wasn't in line with Rog's character. Moreover, he didn't want his secret to be exposed in front of others. "Fenrir, since you can speak, then use human language to communicate in the future. Don't use the wolf language anymore." Rog rubbed the soft fur on Fenrir's head and said softly, "Okay." Fenrir immediately replied, "Right, I almost forgot about the important matter." Rog retracted his right hand and then continued, "Fenrir, you should have come to Earth before. Then, have you done anything on Earth that would make people happy? Something that would leave behind your bloodline?" Abomination and Red Tank, who were barbecuing, heard Rog's words and immediately turned their heads to look at Fenrir. Even Black, who was on Fenrir's head, revealed an expression that all men would understand. "No, absolutely not. I'm not that kind of wolf." Fenrir didn't react at first. Until he saw Abomination and the others' eyes, he immediately understood and denied it 3 times. Chapter 490. Fenrir firmly denied it, but unfortunately, the 4 men present did not believe him. Are you sure? A werewolf told me that you might be their ancestor? Rog continued to ask. This is absolutely impossible. At that time, I would only treat humans as food. How could I give birth to a werewolf descendant with a human? This is slander, blatant slander. Where is that werewolf? I want to eat him and let him know the price of slandering a demon wolf. Fenrir said fiercely with his teeth bared. However, his behavior made Rog and the others even more suspicious. Fenrir's behavior was similar to those men who suddenly found out that they had a few years old child. Since you are so sure, then you wouldn't mind letting Little Black search your memory, right? It was not that Rog did not believe Fenrir, but his intuition told him that Fenrir might really have some unclear relationship with those werewolves. Of course, I am innocent. I have nothing to be afraid of. Fenrir still had that expression of, I have been slandered. Little Black, look at Fenrir's memory and see if he has forgotten anything. No problem. As soon as Rog finished speaking, Little Black began to search Fenrir's memory. After parasitism, the symbiotic body could search the host's memory at will, regardless of whether the host agreed or not. If the symbiotic body did not take the initiative to mention it, the host would not realize that his memory was being searched. This was also the reason why Rog did not let Little Black parasitize him. The symbiotic body could indeed give the host unimaginable regeneration and transformation ability, but compared to his own secret, these abilities were not attractive to Rog at all. It did not take long for Little Black to search Fenrir's memory and confirm that what Fenrir said was the truth. That's a pity. I wanted to give you double the treatment, but I didn't expect you to be such a rule-abiding wolf. Rog sighed slightly and said helplessly. Although Henry wanted to use him and Fenrir as chess pieces, he did not mind cooperating with Henry's plan a little. In the beginning, he had no interest in the werewolves. What he wanted was none other than the 13 sacred weapons of the blood race. But he didn't expect that Henry would take the initiative to come to him with 4 sacred artifacts. What was even more unexpected was that Henry actually wanted to use him as a pawn. Although Henry kept calling him Mr. Minato when they were talking, Rog could tell that this was just flattery on the surface. Harry took out the pictures of the 4 sacred artifacts and provided the information about them. It seemed that he had shown enough sincerity. But in fact, Henry didn't mention anything about how to hand over the 4 saint artifacts. Not only did he not mention anything about the delivery, but Harry also did not give a clear answer as to how much he needed to do to obtain the sacred artifact. Since the beginning of his detective career, Rog had his own set of principles when it came to business. This included how to deal with the situation where the client did not take the initiative to mention the remuneration, as well as how to deal with the situation where the client went back on his word. From his point of view, Henry was the kind of client who was highly likely to go back on his word. In a few days, you two will come with me to Los Angeles. We'll make a small deal with the werewolves. Rog looked up and said to Fenrir and Xiaohei. Later, he joined the Abomination and Red Tank's barbecue team. Fenrir agreed to come to Los Angeles at 12 o'clock this evening. This is the address of the meeting. After staying in Konoha's headquarters for 3 days, Roger sent a message to Henry to meet him. He wanted to find a spell that could shrink Fenrir's size for a long time from the magic book provided by Dr. Doom. As a result, he only found the shrinking technique that lasted only 1 minute. In addition to the duration of only 1 minute, the shrinking effect of the shrinking technique was not particularly in line with his requirements. The shrinking technique could only shrink the target's size to 1/3 of the original size at most. With Fenrir's size, even if he was reduced to 1/3, he was still far larger than the same kind of giant wolf on Earth. So he directly gave up the idea of learning the shrinking technique and learned the invisibility cloak. The invisibility cloak, as the name suggests, was a spell that could make the caster or the target invisible. After casting, the caster or the target would be completely invisible as if they were wearing the invisibility cloak. After learning the magic of the invisibility cloak, Rog deliberately tested the invisibility effect of the invisibility cloak. It was impossible to see through the invisibility cloak with the naked eye. Even with the thermal imager and infrared night vision, it was also impossible to see through the invisibility effect of the invisibility cloak. The best way to break the invisibility effect of the invisibility cloak was to use magic to detect. After all, only magic could defeat magic. After spending 3 days to learn the invisibility cloak, Rog took Fenrir and Blackie to the suburban forest of Los Angeles. After arriving at the agreed meeting place through the portal, he cast the invisibility cloak on himself and Fenrir, then lay on Fenrir's back, patiently waiting for Henry's arrival. As for Blackie, he was in Fenrir's body and did not need any invisibility. As long as he did not take the initiative to show up, others would not discover his existence at all. In order to make the meeting more enjoyable, Rog deliberately arranged the meeting time to be in the middle of the night. Because the moon was dark, the wind was strong, and the night of murder. Time passed little by little, and when there were only 5 minutes left before the agreed time, Rog perceived the life signals quickly approaching the forest. Among these life signals that were far beyond ordinary people, he saw the life signal belonging to Henry. 100, 300, 500, 1,000. In less than 5 minutes, more than 1,000 werewolves' life signals broke into his perceptual network. This Henry is very charismatic. He can really call so many werewolves. Although he had guessed that Henry would call many werewolves over, more than 1,000 werewolves were still beyond Rog's expectations. Not to mention more than 1,000 werewolves, even if more than 1,000 ordinary people gathered together, it would attract the attention of the authorities. By the time the meeting time arrived, there were more than 1,500 werewolves in the forest. Although Rog and Fenrir were both under the magic effect of the invisibility cloak, Henry, who was walking in front, still found their position first. He smelled the scent of Rog and Fenrir. "Mr. Minato, we came as agreed." Henry looked at the open space in front of him and said in a friendly tone. After Henry spoke, Rog removed the invisibility cloak on himself and Fenrir and appeared in front of Henry and others. "I brought Fenrir. If you don't mind, I want to see the 4 sacred tools first." After hearing Rog's words, some displeasure quickly appeared on Henry's face, but he quickly suppressed this displeasure. "Mr. Minato, you can rest assured that we will never go back on what we promised you. But the 4 sacred tools are very important, so we didn't carry them with us. If Mr. Minato wants to see it personally, I can take you there later. What do you think?" Henry still had the same pleasant look, and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Yes, Fenrir is there. If you want to confirm something, you can do it now." Rog pointed to Fenrir behind him and said casually. In fact, he was also curious about what method Henry would use to confirm the relationship between Werewolf and Fenrir. After expressing his gratitude to Rog, Henry waved his hand and motioned to several old werewolves behind him to come forward and arrange it. Unlike the blood breed, werewolves don't have much research on magic. But after seeing the old werewolves take out one magic material after another from the boxes they carried, Rog felt that he seemed to have underestimated these werewolves. Various magic materials were laid out one by one, and at the same time, these werewolves began to draw an extremely complicated magic array on the ground. This magic array? Although Rog is not a professional sorcerer, he is a student of the Sorcerer Supreme Ancient One, and his magic knowledge and theory are not bad. After carefully observing the magic on the magic array, he soon found that something was wrong. This is definitely not a magic array to confirm bloodline. This is a magic array with the effect of forced enslavement. After discovering this, Rog looked at Henry with some displeasure. At first, he thought that Henry just wanted to use Fenrir to play with political means to gain great prestige. However, it turns out that Henry's ambition is bigger than he thought. Henry intends to directly enslave Fenrir. Is this magic array a bit wrong? Rog came to Henry and said calmly, "This is the magic array developed by our werewolf ancestors, so it is not the same as the magic array of human beings. Speaking of which, Mr. Minato is laughing at us. Although our werewolves have a stronger fertility and people than vampires, In terms of magic, we can't compare with those vampires. Henry, who looked rough, said in a regretful tone. Is that so? But from what I see, the spells used here are no different from the spells used by humans. For example, the magic that represents soul imprisonment and enslavement. As soon as Rog finished speaking, Henry, who had been very kind just now, immediately revealed his original appearance. A sharp right claw was aimed directly at Rog's neck. Faced with Henry's sudden attack, Rog did not move, but mobilized chakra in his body and released a ninjutsu in an instant. Raiten Chidori Toru. Light blue lightning instantly appeared around Rog, blocking Henry's attack and knocking Henry out. I was going to play with you for a while and see what kind of plan you have, but I didn't expect that you would dare to directly enslave Fenrir. Chapter 491. Henry, who was repelled by the Chidori, rolled a few times in the air, and then fell to the ground like a real beast. He tried to attack Rog with his right hand, but he felt a strong numbness, as if thousands of needles were piercing his palm at the same time. However, what Henry cared about at this time was not the numbness in his right hand, but the light blue lightning around Rog's body. As we all know, only one person in Konoha can use lightning attacks, and that is the director of Konoha's intelligence agency, the 4th Hokage Rog. You're not Minato, you're the 4th Hokage. Henry's face became very serious, and he slowly said in a low voice, Minato is the 4th Hokage. Rog answered with a joke that only he knew. Oh, I didn't expect that the 4th Hokage would not dare to show his true face. Although Henry didn't understand why Rog said that, he didn't care about it, and instead mocked Rog. If you want to provoke me and make me lose my mind in the battle, I advise you not to waste your effort. This kind of simple and idiotic method will only work on werewolves with no brains. Since the other side took the initiative to mock him, Rog certainly won't be polite, and directly taunted him back. At the same time, in front of Henry and many other werewolves, he summoned 4 wood clone jutsu with Minato's appearance. Without any instructions, when these 4 wood clone jutsu appeared, they didn't hesitate and immediately rushed to the north, south, east, and west. Not good. He's going to activate a barrier. When the wood clone jutsu disappeared, Henry immediately realized that something was wrong. However, it was all too late. In just a few seconds, a rectangular barrier with purple transparent flames quickly formed, trapping all the werewolves in the forest. Barrier ninjutsu, 4 violet flame formation. Although Henry didn't know the name and power of the 4 violet flame formation, he was no stranger to it. When the Skrull attacked the headquarters, he saw the 4 violet flame formation from the live TV broadcast. However, when he was trapped in it, he really understood the despair of the Skrull people. Not letting any of them off? As expected of the 4th Hokage, his appetite is really big. The moment the 4 violet flame formation was formed, Harry instinctively thought that Rog was going to wipe them all out. Judging from the situation, it was normal for Henry to have such thoughts. After all, to a certain extent, the name of the 4th Hokage is equivalent to the Grim Reaper. Not only did Henry have such a thought, but the werewolves that he had gathered also had the same thought. Konoha's tyranny and the strength of the 4th Hokage, in the Dark World, is a well-known fact. Don't worry. Even if I want to kill someone, I will only kill you and some of your loyal subordinates. As for the other werewolves, I'm not a demon. I won't kill them all. Roger said in a friendly tone. After he finished speaking, he turned around and glanced at the werewolves around him. Although he didn't think much of these werewolves, it would still take some time to kill over 1,500 of them. More importantly, killing these werewolves is not in line with his habit of maximizing economic benefits. Although these werewolves are a bit irritable and wild, as long as they are trained a little, they will become a group of very good workers. So you want us werewolves to become Konoha's dogs. You don't have to be delusional, we werewolves will never be slaves. Henry coldly snorted and said with a disdainful look, Is that so? I hope you won't be slapped in the face later. After saying that, Rog no longer controlled his aura. Instead, he completely released the aura that he had gained from his many years of fighting and killing. At the moment when he completely released his momentum, in the eyes of Henry and the others, he was no longer a handsome human man, but a grim reaper who is in charge of the life and death of all living things. Those who kneel down, I will spare their lives. Rog didn't look at the werewolves around him and just said in a soft tone. Although his voice wasn't loud, every werewolf in the forest heard it clearly. You don't have to. Just as Henry was about to say something, he saw the werewolves kneeling down one after another silently. In just a few seconds, there were more than 1,000 werewolves kneeling down in the forest. Do you know why you have always been no match for the vampires? The reason is very simple. Because you are too weak to be a leader. If you want to turn your subordinates into an invincible pack of wolves, you must first make yourself an unparalleled wolf king. A weak wolf king can't lead a pack of powerful wolves. Only when you have enough strength can you create a group of powerful subordinates. I'll teach you this lesson for free. Rog didn't know what the situation was like inside the werewolves. But one thing he was sure of was that the werewolves' current small group structure couldn't be compared with the vampire clans that had a complete social structure. This was also the reason why the werewolves couldn't compete with the vampire clans after breaking free from their enslavement. Relying on their superior reproductive ability and the fact that they weren't afraid of sunlight, the werewolves could organize a decisive battle where they had the advantage in terms of numbers and timing. They could use an unprecedented large-scale group battle to establish the werewolves' position. Unfortunately, the werewolves' loose structure of groups of 3 to 5 severely hindered their progress in forming a complete tribe. If the vampires who used clans as their foundation were an empire, then the werewolves, who used small groups as their foundation, were a small tribe. Of course, it was impossible for a tribe to compete with an empire's power. There should be a lot of people in the werewolves who saw this. For example, Henry should know this very well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have painstakingly planned for the position of the werewolves' king. Of course, this didn't exclude the possibility that Henry was purely trying to satisfy his desire for power. Looking at the kneeling werewolves, Henry suddenly smiled bitterly and shook his head helplessly. Although the battle between him and Rog hadn't officially started, the result could be announced in advance. There was no need for anything. No matter what the result of the battle between him and Rog was, it couldn't change the reality in front of him. The werewolves were completely kneeling. Well done, worthy of the 4th Hokage who single-handedly established Konoha, you win. Henry removed his werewolf form and returned to his human form, then continued to say, as the loser, I don't know if I'm qualified to make a small request. You can say it. Rog didn't directly refuse Henry. Now, it was impossible for Henry to play any tricks. From the moment the 4 purple flames formation was formed and the werewolves knelt down, the result was already determined. I underestimated you, underestimated Konoha, and overestimated my people. Everything was my own plan. I wanted to become the king of the werewolves, so I schemed against you. None of this has anything to do with them. They just trusted me and thought that I wanted to stop the vampire, so they came here. I know I'm not qualified to ask you to do anything, but the werewolves have been broken by the vampire once. If you can, I hope you can give the werewolves a chance to stand up again in the future. I don't have any satisfactory reward to give you. I hope that my insignificant life will be enough for you to be magnanimous this once. Henry put his right hand on his left chest, turned it into a claw and pierced his chest, then he grabbed it hard. A faint sound like a water ball being crushed sounded in Henry's body. Henry, with a rough face, maintained his last smile. His whole body fell forward and fell heavily to the ground. Bright red blood continued to flow from the wound, dyeing the surrounding grass red. Looking at Henry, who had completely lost his life, Rog didn't say anything. After a few seconds of silence, he turned and looked at the werewolves behind him. Give him a funeral worthy of his status. After that, Rog didn't pay attention to these werewolves, came in front of Fenrir, and asked Fenrir, those werewolves who didn't kneel, do you think it's necessary to kill them? Although he was 100% sure that Henry was not his opponent, but Henry's action of committing suicide still touched Rog a little. Henry may not be a very qualified leader, but it was undeniable that he was indeed a werewolf who cared about the future of the werewolves. It's just that he didn't choose the right way, but had the idea of killing Rog and Fenrir. Let them live, their tribe is quite pitiful. After thinking seriously for more than 10 seconds, Fenrir gave his answer. Since you've said so, then let's spare their lives. From now on, these guys are under your command. Rog immediately decided the fate of these werewolves. Are you sure you don't want to think about it again? No, they are werewolves, you are the demon wolf, you are the most suitable to lead them. Oh, all right. Fenrir wasn't surprised by Rog's arrangement. In his view, this was what Rog would do. After burying Henry, these werewolves looked up at the direction of the moon at the same time, turned into werewolves, and then howled to the sky. This slightly messy collective howling lasted for nearly half a minute before it gradually stopped. Although Henry was dead, it didn't mean that things were over. After these werewolves held the funeral for Henry, Rog sitting on Fenrir's back said again, "Give me the 4 vampires' sacred tools. In addition, go and inform the other werewolves that from today onwards, Fenrir is the wolf king of your werewolves. I don't care where they are, let them all come over within 3 days. Those who refuse to recognize Fenrir as the wolf king will have to bear the consequences." Chapter 492. Beverly Hills Hotel, in a 5-star suite. Because the vampire issue had not been resolved, Rog extended the suite for a month when he was at Konoha's headquarters to make it easier for him to live in the future. At this time, he was sitting alone in the suite's living room, looking at the 4 vampire sacred tools that Henry used to lure him into the trap. Bone harp, butcher's knife, ghost lantern, poison bottle. It had to be said that the vampire was a bit too casual when naming the sacred tools. However, Rog could completely understand the vampire's approach, because to a certain extent, he also had naming difficulties. Xiao Hei had a deep understanding of this. Throwing these messy thoughts to the back of his mind, he opened the box containing the bone harp. Bone harp, if one only looked at the name, one would think that this was a sacred tool that looked like a harp. But in fact, the bone harp was an ancient rib. Yes, it was a set of ribs, a complete set of ribs with a spine. The reason why this set of ribs had the name bone harp was purely because when the bones were stained with blood, they would make a creaking sound, making the creatures who heard the sound fall into a state of weakness and weakness. In addition to this sound that was similar to the sound of weakening magic, the bone harp had another function. As long as the bone harp was worn on the body, one would have a set of bone armor with amazing defensive power. After putting the ribs that belonged to some unlucky person back into the box, Rog took out the butcher's knife that was said to have killed 5 million people from another box. The butcher's knife, also known as the angel's thorn, was a weapon that was similar to a fist. Rog did not believe that the butcher's knife had killed 5 million people. The butcher's knife may have killed a lot of people, but the number of 5 million was obviously an exaggeration. Although he did not know when the butcher's knife was made, even in the current era where the population was far more than before, 5 million people was a very exaggerated number. Compared to the bone harp, the butcher's knife's effect was much simpler. The butcher's knife could curse the souls of the killed and imprison them, making these souls the slaves of the butcher's knife's owner. It was said that holding the butcher's knife was equivalent to having 5 million undead warriors. But until now, no one had ever successfully summoned the undead warriors. For some reason, the image of the goddess of death appeared in Rog's mind when he was playing with this bayonet-shaped butcher's knife. Alas, I don't know where the eldest princess of Asgard went after leaving Jotunheim. If it were her, she would definitely be able to confirm if there were 5 million undead warriors in butcher's knife. Compared to the bone harp and the butcher knife, which were obviously not good weapons, the ghost lantern and the poison bottle looked much more normal. The ghost lantern looked no different from the black iron lanterns of the Middle Ages. The only difference was that the ordinary lantern had a candle, while the ghost lantern had a crystal ball that emitted a dark green light. The simple-looking ghost lantern did not have the flashy abilities of the bone zither and butcher blade. The only effect of the ghost lantern was that it could cause the target to hallucinate through its green light and control the target's actions. Among these 4 holy weapons, whether it was the bone zither and butcher knife used for direct combat or the ghost lantern used for support, none of them piqued Rog's interest. The only thing he was more interested in now was the blood race holy weapon known as the poison bottle. The poison bottle was the most simple of the 4 holy weapons. It was a round bottle with a narrow top and a wide bottom. If it were not for the golden threads that wrapped around the bottle, the poison bottle would be a trash glass bottle that no one would be interested in even if it was thrown on the street. The poison bottle's appearance was very simple, but its ability was not simple at all. Dripping blood into the poison bottle would cause the blood to mutate in the poison bottle. Drinking the mutated blood would cause humans, vampires, werewolves, and other creatures to mutate and become terrifying and violent monsters. The first time he saw the picture and information of the poison bottle, Rog had already thought of the most suitable candidate for the poison bottle: Dr. Lizard. As a top expert in the field of cross-species genetics, Dr. Lizard would definitely be interested in the mutated blood in the poison bottle. After the matter with the vampires was over, he would give the poison bottle to Dr. Lizard to study for a period of time to see if he could find anything interesting. After throwing the 4 holy weapons into the psychic scroll, Rog picked up the full moon ritual that was sent along with the holy weapons. The full moon ritual was the holy book of the werewolves after the werewolves broke free from the vampires' enslavement. They referred to the vampires' holy book, the Book of Shifting. Of course, due to the cultural heritage, the contents of the full moon ritual could not be compared to the Book of Shifting. Although the full moon ritual recorded some history and black magic of the werewolves, it had basically evolved into a list of the werewolves' internal members. Every alpha werewolf would have a full moon ritual in their hands, which recorded the names of all the werewolves under their control. Speaking of alpha werewolves, it was necessary to talk about the vampires' noble titles. According to the vampires' method of dividing vampires into 5 levels by their noble titles, the werewolves had also developed their own ranking system. Alpha werewolves, beta werewolves, omega werewolves, and wolf pups under the age of 10. Alpha werewolves corresponded to vampires' dukes, and the other levels corresponded to the vampires' noble titles. However, compared to the vampires who had long formed a stable clan system, the werewolves were much more backward in terms of organizational structure. Alpha werewolves controlled all the werewolves in an area, and alpha werewolves were the leaders of the small packs. According to the number of people, an alpha werewolf would have a small pack of 4 to 10 werewolves. Werewolves were dark creatures, but compared to vampires who had a long lifespan, their individual strength was relatively weaker. After all, as they grew older, they would be able to learn more abilities. In terms of learning black magic, vampires were far more talented than werewolves. If it were not for the vampires' low fertility and the strict embrace restrictions, werewolves would have been beaten up by vampires long ago. Currently, there were a total of 5 alpha werewolves in North America, including the dead Henry. The area on the west coast of the United States was Henry's territory. In the full moon ceremony book that belonged to Henry, there were about 2,000 werewolves registered. Among the werewolves he brought here tonight, only about 200 were his subordinates, that is, the werewolves who never knelt down. As for the rest, they were all from the other 4 alpha werewolves. Henry was openly poaching the other alpha werewolves. Wasn't he afraid of causing the dissatisfaction of the other 4 alpha werewolves? But thinking about it carefully, this was a very normal operation. Henry was thinking about how to become the king of the werewolves. Sooner or later, he would offend the other 4 alpha werewolves. Since he would offend them sooner or later, he might as well poach them earlier. He even dared to plot against Konoha, so how could he be worried about causing the dissatisfaction of the other 4 alpha werewolves? If the situation of the other 4 alpha werewolves was similar to Henry's, then the total number of werewolves should be about 10,000. 10,000 werewolves? This number was a bit small. Rog originally planned to drive all the werewolves to the planet Tatooine after this matter was over, letting them plant vegetables, trees, and flowers there. The news of Henry's suicide and Rog's plan to make Fenrir the king of the werewolves quickly spread. However, the next development of the matter was once again beyond his expectations. The day after Henry's death, The other 4 alpha werewolves rushed to the Beverly Hills hotel where Rog lived and expressed their gratitude for his decision to make Fenrir the king of the werewolves. This development was wrong, right? Looking at the 4 alpha werewolves with happy faces, Rog actually had the illusion that he played too many games and couldn't keep up with the times. In the following conversation, he finally knew why the 4 alpha werewolves showed such a happy look as if they won the lottery. The reason was very simple: the werewolves were bullied too badly by the vampires. In the words of these alpha werewolves, their days in recent years were no different from the fugitives of the American colonial period. Although the number of vampires was not comparable to the werewolves, in terms of wealth, the vampires were several streets ahead of the werewolves. In a capitalist country like the United States, the power that the vampires could use was much more than the werewolves. In addition to guarding against the attacks of the vampires, they also had to guard against attacks from human society. For example, gangs, mercenaries, assassins, and so on were hired by the vampires. Ordinary human weapons could not cause fatal damage to the werewolves, but the problem was that the vampires not only hired these people but also provided them with silver bullets that were specifically targeted at the werewolves. Under such a double blow, these werewolves could only live a vagrant life like the gypsies. As alpha wolves, they didn't have to live like vagrants, but their subordinates weren't as happy. The 4 alpha werewolves had heard of the plan of the vampires to bring Cain and the first city back to the human world. It was not that they did not want to stop the vampires, but they were really powerless. Henry had contacted them early in the morning, but they never gave Henry a clear reply. Even when Henry took the initiative to poach them, they chose to turn a blind eye to it. Henry wanted to become the king of the werewolves, not only to satisfy his own ambitions, but also because the current werewolves really needed a bold leader. After sending the 4 alpha werewolves away, Rog suddenly understood Henry a little. The vampires had broken the werewolf's spine, and Henry was right. Just by looking at the 4 alpha werewolves, one could see how far the werewolves had fallen. How were they still king wolves? Even huskies were braver than them. Chapter 493. After knowing the true thoughts of the 4 alpha werewolves, the first thing that came to Rog's mind was not that these werewolves were pitiful, but that these werewolves were really disappointing. To put it bluntly, the current werewolves were simply sorry for their ancestors. If those werewolves knew that the freedom of their clan that they fought for with their lives had fallen to such a group of juniors, they might have preferred to do nothing. At least this way, the werewolves would not become stray dogs. Although these werewolves were really pitiful, Rog did not intend to stand up for them. He had always believed in one sentence, that is, God helps those who help themselves. If you don't work hard, don't expect others to help you. Although this approach was slightly cruel, it was the basic principle that maintained the operation of the world. For a simple example, it was like borrowing money from the bank. If you want to borrow money from the bank, you have to make yourself valuable first. The bank was not a philanthropist; it would not lend money to people who had nothing. Similarly, the world was not a philanthropist. If you want to change your fate, you have to risk your life to make yourself more valuable. If you can't do this, don't blame the world for being cruel. Although these werewolves were still a little useful in Rog's eyes, they were far from enough to make Konoha fully help them. Konoha would not let others bully its own people, but Konoha would not raise waste. If these werewolves did not show their value, Rog would definitely let them go back to where they came from. Don't even think about eating and drinking for free in Konoha. For the time being, Rog put the problem of these werewolves to the back of his mind, and picked up the information about the Blood Clan that had just been sent by Konoha's intelligence department. According to the information, the Grand Duke of the Blood Clan, Wilhelm von Behring, had arrived in Los Angeles a few days ago. On the second day of Grand Duke Wilhelm's arrival in Los Angeles, the vampire hunters in the Los Angeles area were crazily attacked by vampires. The Bat Must Die bar he had been to before had now become a veritable broken bar. In addition to retaliating against the vampire hunters, these vampires were also collecting information about Minato. He didn't know if these vampires had discovered something, or if they were afraid of Minato's strength. Until today, Rog had not been attacked by any vampires. It wasn't a secret that he was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel. With the abilities of the Blood Clan, it wouldn't be difficult for them to find out. Just as he was considering whether he should take the initiative to meet these vampires, the doorbell suddenly rang. After opening the door of the room, he saw a young man in a hotel employee uniform. "Hello, Mr. Minato. This is your invitation card." Rog didn't make things difficult for the hotel employee who was obviously under the influence of a control spell. Instead, he took the invitation. Note 1. Got it. After closing the door, he opened the gold-plated invitation. The content of the invitation was very simple. It was to invite him to the top-notch Japanese restaurant, Urasawa, for dinner at 8 o'clock tonight. Note 2. The name on the letter was Duke William von Behring of the Brooke family. He didn't come directly to his door, but invited him to dinner. Duke William's approach made Rog a little surprised. However, he didn't care too much about this. It was always better to be polite than to be polite. And he didn't know if it was his own illusion, but he always felt that Duke William asked him to meet at the top-notch Japanese restaurant, Urasawa, seemed to be hinting at something. When it comes to Japanese food, the first thing that comes to mind is Japan. And ninja is an ancient profession from Japan. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Rog, who rarely changed into formal clothes, took Henry's Bentley SUV and arrived at the Japanese restaurant, Urasawa. The driver who drove for him was also Henry's driver, a young alpha werewolf named Bran. On the way to the restaurant, the young werewolf named Bran didn't say a word, but occasionally looked at Rog in the back through the rearview mirror. Although Bran controlled his emotions quite well, Rog could see at a glance that the young werewolf couldn't wait to eat him alive. But he didn't care about Bran's killing intent at all. A young werewolf who hadn't experienced the beating of society and only had simple and loyal thoughts in his mind. When he got out of the car, Rog tidied up the collar of his suit and gave the young werewolf named Bran a little advice. Don't do anything stupid. Your lives were exchanged by Henry's own life. Don't let his final sacrifice go to waste. After saying that, Rog ignored Bran, who had a complicated expression, and got out of the car to head to the restaurant. Bran was one of the werewolves who didn't kneel that night, and he was also Henry's most promising junior. If Henry's plan went smoothly, Bran would be the one to take over his position as Alpha Werewolf King. Unfortunately, Henry was destined to live to see this day. Urasawa Restaurant was known as the best Japanese restaurant on the West Coast. It was regarded as the West Coast version of New York's top Japanese restaurant, Masa. Urasawa Restaurant's head chef, Iro Urasawa, was once a student of Masa Restaurant's owner and head chef, the famous Japanese chef, Masa Tamiyax. Urasawa was very famous, and the level of Japanese food was very high, but the restaurant was small, with only 10 chairs, and only 10 customers could be served at most in a night. Tonight, Urasawa Restaurant, which had always been difficult to find, only had 2 customers. After entering this authentic Japanese restaurant, the first thing Rog saw was Grand Duke William sitting in a chair at the bar. He was wearing an expensive and elegant classical suit and meticulously combed long black hair. If it weren't for the unusual blood-red color of his eyes, Grand Duke William would have looked like a European noble template in a girl's fantasy. In addition to Grand Duke William, there was only Urasawa's head chef, Iro Urasawa, who was wearing a traditional Japanese chef's costume in the restaurant. However, this famous Japanese chef was like a child who had been reprimanded by an adult at this time. He stood shivering inside the kitchen counter and looked down at the surface of the kitchen counter. Should I call you Namikaze Minato or Rog? When Rog entered the restaurant, Grand Duke William took the lead and asked. His tone was very calm, without the slightest pressure, nor would it make people feel the slightest bit nervous. It doesn't matter which one you call me, Rog replied, and then came to a chair next to Grand Duke William and slowly sat down. Let's start. After Rog took his seat, Grand Duke William ordered Chef Iro Urasawa. Although his tone was calm, the feeling it gave people was completely different. When talking to Rog, his tone didn't give people any pressure, just like a conversation between friends. But when talking to Chef Iro Urasawa, his tone was full of a sense of command, as if he was ordering his subordinates. You don't have to be so harsh on ordinary people. If the chef is nervous, he won't be able to make good dishes. As soon as his voice fell, Rog's chakra came to Chef Iro Urasawa's body, dispelling the pressure of Grand Duke William for him. Does an existence like you still care about the life and death of ordinary people? Grand Duke William turned his head to look at Rog and asked with a smile. Except for the gods, we are all mortals, and you and I are the same. Although he has far more power than ordinary people, Rog doesn't think that he is nobler than ordinary people like the Blood Clan. On the contrary, he cherishes his current human identity. It's a bit interesting. If we didn't meet in this environment, you and I might have become good friends. At this time, Grand Duke William was not as violent and cold-blooded as the rumors said. If he didn't know that Grand Duke William was from the Brute clan, which was the most suitable for fighting among the Blood clan, Rog would have the illusion that he was a kind aristocrat. Maybe. Rog took a sip of the sake in the glass and said slowly, "You took over the Wolf clan and killed Jacob and the others. I can directly make the decision to write it off. What we are going to do is not against Konoha, and we don't need to let things develop into something more serious." Although Grand Duke William has not fought with Rog, he knows that even if he went all out, he may not be a match for Rog. The strength of a Blood Clan Duke is indeed very strong, but Rog is not weak either. In fact, I am not particularly interested in what you are going to do. Even if you really release Cain from the place of seal, it is not up to me. It's just that you have something in your hands that I want, so you should understand what I mean. Whether or not Cain can return to the human world is, in a strict sense, not within the scope of Konoha's handling. There were already enough hidden big shots on Earth. One more vampire ancestor was not a big deal. It's just that he is now interested in the 13 sacred tools of the Blood Clan, so he made a small move against the Blood Clan. We can't give you the sacred object. This is related to the dignity of the Blood Clan. Even the true identity of Rog has been investigated, so it is impossible for Grand Duke William not to know what he wants. However, as he said, this is related to the dignity of the Blood Clan, and it is not an existence that can be traded. If someone suddenly tells me that they want what I have, I will not be willing to give it to them. It is human nature, and it is understandable. Well, let's make a deal. For what you are going to do next, Konoha can pretend that they don't know anything. In return, I want 4 sacred tools. Rog made his suggestion to Grand Duke William. The Blood Clan does have 8 sacred tools in their hands, but it is not an easy thing to obtain these 8 sacred tools. This is not a matter of eliminating the Blood Clan, but that eliminating the Blood Clan may not be able to get the sacred tools. If the Blood Clan is unwilling to surrender and would rather die than be willing to give up the sacred tools, Rog will not be able to find them all over the world. Finding things is not an easy thing. Not to mention that the person who hid them knows magic. For sacred tools in exchange for Konoha not to make a move? I have to say that you are a person who is not willing to suffer any losses. Of course, Grand Duke William knew why Rog had such a proposal. He was afraid that he would not get anything in the end, so he chose to compromise in advance. But I still say the same thing. We will not give up the sacred tools. This is related to the dignity of the Blood Clan. In the end, Grand Duke William rejected Rog's proposal. Don't refuse so quickly. I know that this proposal seems to be a loss for you, but think about it carefully. You are not without any gains. Let's put it this way. If Konoha stops you with all its strength, you will never have the chance to complete the plan. So you have to think about it differently. You are not losing the 4 sacred tools, but using these 4 sacred tools in exchange for a chance to smoothly welcome back the ancestor. If you exchange, you still have a chance to welcome back the ancestor. If you don't exchange, you really have no chance at all. Saint artifacts are precious, but compared to the progenitor, they are nothing. If your ancestor returns smoothly, you can have as many sacred tools as you want. At this time, Rog was like an unscrupulous salesman who was trying to trick the elderly to buy health products. He was trying to trick Grand Duke William, an old man who had lived for hundreds of years. You are secretly changing the concept. In the end, you still want to take away the sacred tools. As an old monster who had lived for hundreds of years, Grand Duke William was not moved at all. You can think of this as secretly changing the concept, but compared to secretly changing the concept, I prefer to call this a forced sale. Since Grand Duke William was unmoved, Rog had no intention of continuing to fool him. He directly said his true thoughts. You can think whatever you want. Anyway, I am going to do this business. Rog would not have the slightest psychological burden to bully dark creatures. Chapter 494. Konoha's tyranny really lives up to its reputation. Grand Duke William turned his head to look at Rog, who was not even a fraction of his age, with a faint smile on his face. This is also something that can't be helped. If Konoha is not tyrannical, it will not be able to suppress those monsters in the dark. Rog replied with a smile. Looking at Rog, whose expression did not change, and who completely grasped the initiative, Grand Duke William did not speak. He picked up the sake in front of him and slowly took a sip. Along with Grand Duke William's silence, the small dining hall fell into a strange silence. The slight sound of the restaurant's chef making sushi became the only source of sound in the restaurant at this time. After a few minutes of silence, Grand Duke William spoke again. The matter of the sacred tool is of great importance. I need to discuss it with the other Grand Dukes before I can decide. No problem, I'll give you 3 days. After saying that, Rog directly got up and left this famous top-notch Japanese restaurant on the West Coast, without any intention of tasting the sushi. When Rog's figure disappeared from the restaurant, Grand Duke William, who had a pleasant expression just now, immediately changed his expression. His expression was as cold as an iceberg in Antarctica that has not melted for thousands of years. Inform the other clans, let them bring the elites of their clans over, the peace talks have failed. Grand Duke William, who was sitting in the chair, did not get up, as if he was giving orders to the air. Then he raised the wineglass in front of him again and drank the sake in it. The moment he put down the wineglass, his figure also disappeared strangely from the restaurant like a chalk painting being erased. After returning to the Bentley SUV driven by Bran, Rog took out his mobile phone and sent a message to the Punisher at Konoha's headquarters. In 3 days, bring the Abomination and the Red Tank, as well as 10 teams of special forces to Los Angeles. The weapons will be specially made for vampires. After sending the message, he said to Bran, "Go to the factory in the suburbs." After saying that, he directly closed his eyes and began to empty his mind. Although Grand Duke William said that he wanted to discuss with the other Grand Dukes, his real subtext was that there was no room for discussion on this matter. Rog understood what he meant and gave him 3 days to do so. These 3 days did not refer to waiting for them for 3 days. Instead, it referred to using their fists to do the talking after 3 days. 3 days later, Konoha and the Wolf Clan won, and the Blood Clan handed over the sacred weapon. Similarly, if the Blood Race wins, Konoha and the Wolves won't interfere with the Blood Race's plan. This was a plan that was not explicitly stated, but both sides agreed to. After driving for about 20 minutes, Bran arrived at an abandoned suburban factory. Because Fenrir was not suitable to appear in the city, Rog let him stay in the suburbs and gave him the task of reorganizing the werewolves. Although Fenrir was only a magic wolf, he was born in Asgard and accompanied the goddess of death on her expedition to the 9 realms. Fenrir definitely couldn't handle government affairs. However, it was not difficult for him to reorganize the Wolf Clan into an army. Although only 2 days had passed, these werewolves initially had the appearance of an army under the training of Fenrir's fangs and claws. After entering the factory that had been abandoned for many years, Rog saw the 4 alpha wolf kings that he had just seen this morning near Fenrir. I have reached an agreement with the Duke of the Brook clan. After 3 days, there will be a decisive battle between the Wolf Clan and the Blood Clan. Of course, some people from Konoha will also participate in the battle, but the main ones will be your Wolf Clan and the Blood Clan. Don't you Wolf Clan want to rise? Now the opportunity is here. As long as you can defeat the Blood Clan this time, you can join Konoha and completely get rid of the Blood Clan's pursuit. This time, I want all your Alpha Wolf Clan to participate in the battle. I don't care where these Alpha Wolf Clan are. After 3 days, I want to see them here. As for these Beta Wolf Clan and Omega Wolf Clan, they can leave now. Rog said his request directly. This was also a small test for the Wolf Clan. If the Wolf Clan can't complete this test with the help of Konoha, then there are only 2 paths in front of them. One is to be chased to death by the Blood Clan, and the other is to be thrown to the Tatooine planet as a laborer. Rog-sama, isn't this a bit too risky? All the Alpha Wolf Clan will participate in the battle. If the losses are heavy, our Wolf Clan will really have no resistance. After Rog finished speaking, an Alpha Wolf King named Michael came in front of him and said, "This Alpha Wolf King named Michael is the oldest of all the Alpha Wolf Kings and the most timid one." During the day in the hotel, Rog confirmed this. "I may not have told you very clearly during the day, but I will tell you again. Whether you want to get the protection of Konoha or become a part of Konoha, what you have to do is to obediently listen to my instructions and not question my decisions, understand?" Rog glanced at Michael and said with a blank expression, "That's true, but in case." Michael still wanted to explain something, but before he could speak, he saw a silver-white arc across in front of him. In the next second, his vision turned upside down. He saw the upside-down night sky and earth, saw Rog and Fenrir spinning, and saw his own body without a head. Lightning release. Thunderbolt sword draw. Rog didn't intend to continue listening to Michael's nonsense and directly ended his life with Thunderbolt sword draw. It wasn't until Michael's head rolled a few times on the ground that Rog removed the Thunderbolt sword in his right hand. Now, does anyone have any questions? Rog didn't look at the dead Michael and looked at the remaining 3 Alpha Wolf Kings. "No, none at all. We will definitely support Rog-sama's decision." Looking at the 3 Alpha Wolf Kings who were obedient like pet dogs, Rog sighed helplessly. "Bran, from now on Henry and Michael's position as Alpha Wolf belongs to you." Bran was chosen by Henry and personally guided by him, which meant that Bran was definitely outstanding. Although Rog hadn't discovered Bran's strengths yet, he didn't mind giving this little guy a chance in advance. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. After Fenrir's training, the 1,000 over Alpha Wolf Kings that appeared in front of Rog finally had the aura of an elite warrior. In the hierarchy of the Wolf Clan, the Alpha Wolf Kings were an existence that corresponded to the Vampire Marquis. But in reality, the strength of these Alpha Wolf Kings was far from being comparable to the Vampire Marquis, and they were even inferior to the Vampire Earl. The Vampire Clan had strict criteria for the Vampire Marquis. Vampires that weren't strong enough couldn't be promoted to the Marquis until they died. The Wolf Clan was much more casual. As long as they had a small group of 4 or 5 people that belonged to them, they could be called Alpha Wolf Kings. The Alpha Wolf Kings that were judged by this criteria were naturally far from being comparable to the Vampire Marquis. At present, there were only 8 clans left in the Vampire Clan, and there were only 8 Grand Dukes. As a Marquis that was second only to the Grand Duke, there would be no more than 50 of them. This was still an ideal situation. If the Vampire Clan's criteria for promotion were more stringent, the Marquis of the 8 clans may not even add up to 30 people. You are being chased by the Vampire Clan. I don't need to tell you how embarrassed you are. You like to be a stray dog, that's your own business. But Konoha never raises trash. If you want Konoha to protect you, you have to show the value of Konoha's protection. The opportunity is now in front of you. Whether you can seize the opportunity or not, it depends on you. Before departure, Rog made a pre-war mobilization to these Wolf Kings that had nothing to do with hot-bloodedness. Then, he didn't care about what these Alpha Wolf Kings would think. He jumped directly on Fenrir's back and rode Fenrir out of the abandoned factory. Behind Fenrir were the Punisher, Abomination, and Red Tank. Behind them were fully armed 60 members of Konoha's special forces. Bran, who had just become the Alpha Wolf King for a few days, glanced at the murderous Konoha special forces and turned to look at the Alpha Wolf behind him. It wasn't until now that Bran finally understood why Konoha, with few combatants, could make many unruly underground organizations obediently abide by Konoha's rules. Obviously, they were just a group of humans, but they had a fiercer momentum than the Wolf Kings. What shocked Bran even more was the fearless posture shown by every Konoha Special Forces member. Although the opponent they were going to face next was the famous vampire in the Dark World, Bran didn't see the slightest fear in these Special Forces members. It felt like the enemy they were going to face next was not a vampire, but a group of street punks. Compared to the alpha werewolf behind him, Bran finally understood what Henry had been saying all the time. The backbone of the wolf clan was broken by the vampire. Glancing at the 3 wolf kings around him and the alpha wolf behind him with a heavy heart, Bran didn't say anything and silently followed behind the Special Forces members. When Bran followed the Special Forces member without saying a word, the other 3 wolf kings looked at each other and followed as well. During the day, Grand Duke William sent a letter of challenge with the time and place written on it. Grand Duke William didn't say anything about the tactics, nor did he say any superfluous nonsense, he just wrote the time and place on it. The only interesting thing was the signature of the letter of challenge. The 13 vampire clans. Grand Duke William didn't use his own name, nor the name of the 8 vampire clans, but the name of the 13 vampire clans. Signing in the name of the 13 vampire clans means that in the eyes of the vampire clans, this is the ultimate battle for the future of the clan. Chapter 495. There was a crescent moon, a gentle breeze, and everything was quiet. Before the appointed time, Rog, who was riding on Fenrir's back, brought the werewolves to the appointed location. After looking up at the night sky, he set his eyes on Grand Duke William and the others in the distance. Similar to the werewolves, there were not many vampires who came this time. There were only a little over 1,000 of them. Although not many blood breeds had come this time, the blood breeds that were present were all elites of the blood breeds without exception. There were more than 200 of them whose life force was not weaker than vampire Count Jacob and Alexander. However, at this time, only a few people, including Grand Duke William, attracted Rog's attention. Through Chukra's perception, he confirmed the identities of the 7 people beside Grand Duke William. Vampire dukes. To be precise, they were the dukes of the other 7 clans. There were 8 vampire dukes and more than 1,000 vampire elites. Now, those who appeared in front of Rog and the werewolves were not the peak combat power of the vampires, but they were not far from it. While Rog was observing the situation on the vampires' side, Grand Duke William and the others were also silently observing Konoha and the werewolves. Grand Duke William and the others were not surprised that Rog only brought a little over 1,000 werewolves. 2 days ago, they already knew that Rog only left the alpha werewolves behind. Since both sides had arrived, the next thing to do was naturally to start fighting. Whether it was Rog, Grand Duke William, or the other vampire dukes, none of them had the intention to challenge before the battle. They raised their right hands tacitly and then waved it down. The howls of the werewolves and the endless gunshots rang out at the same time, breaking the silence of the night. The vampires who used firearms and weapons pulled the trigger almost at the same time as Konoha's special forces. The ultraviolet bullets aimed at the vampires and the silver bullets aimed at the werewolves suddenly flew toward each other like rain. At the moment when the gunshot sounded, the werewolves behind Konoha's special force members quickly turned into wolves, and then like real beasts, they ran towards the vampire in the distance. The werewolves charged forward, and the vampires on the other side also started to cast black magic that was extremely unique to the blood race. Bats soared into the sky one after another, and the vampires disappeared one after another like shadows. The crimson light of magic continued to shine, lava-like fireballs, blood-red lightning, scarlet tornadoes. It was as if the vampires were performing a fireworks show as they threw out the spells in their hands one by one. The silver bullets and magic created a net of death in front of the charging werewolves, crazily harvesting their flesh and lives. "You two, go and help them," Rog said to the Abomination and Red Tank as he watched the werewolves fall one by one. "No problem." The Red Tank's reply was as concise as ever. As for the Abomination's reply, it was becoming more and more Chunibyu. "My fists are thirsty for blood." The Abomination and the Red Tank rushed out like 2 heavy trucks out of control and rushed straight to the vampire's position. With their completely unreasonable physique, the Abomination and the Red Tank were like two sharp knives that pierced through the vampire's line of defense and directly crashed into the vampire's position. With the Abomination and the Red Tank opening the way, the werewolves who were desperately charging finally rushed through this critical distance, and the battle became the close combat that they were best at. As the werewolves continued to rush into the vampire's position, the sound of gunshots from the vampire's side became more and more sparse, and the large-scale attack magic almost completely disappeared. When the werewolves rushed out, Rog patted Fenrir's back and said softly, "You go and play." After that, he jumped down from Fenrir's back and jumped to the Punisher's side. A whir! After a long howl to the sky, Fenrir, with his amazing body size, rushed toward the vampires on the opposite side. However, before he rushed into the vampire's position, he was stopped by a dozen vampires. Blood Race Market. The vampires who came to stop Fenrir were all Marquis. After joining Konoha, Fenrir didn't participate in any battle, and he didn't even show up much. But even so, the vampires still didn't dare to underestimate Fenrir. The werewolves and vampires fought in full swing, and they didn't stop until they died. The highest combat power on both sides at this time chose to watch the battle instead of participating in it. Rog didn't make a move, nor did Grand Duke William and the other 8 dukes. They were like chess players, quietly watching the chess pieces kill each other. You command the special forces, let them provide long-range support, don't go up and fight the vampires. After watching the battle for more than 10 minutes, Rog turned to the Punisher and said, "No problem, I will never let any of the special forces die here." After hearing the Punisher's answer, Rog, wearing black casual clothes, walked toward the werewolves and vampires. At the moment he stepped out, Grand Duke William and others also moved. The plan of the vampires was simple. The 8 dukes were responsible for holding back Rog, while Fenrir, Red Abomination, Tank, and the alpha werewolves were dealt with by the Marquis. As for the other werewolves, the Count led the other elites to deal with them. Although the fertility of the vampires was far less than that of the werewolves, their individual strength was far stronger than the werewolves. As long as the 8 dukes could hold back Rog, the victory would only belong to the vampires. There was no problem with the arrangement of the vampires. If Rog was on the side of the vampires, he would make a similar arrangement. However, a plan was just a plan. The comparison of strength on the surface couldn't determine the real victory or defeat. If you want to know what the final result is, you will know after the battle. Rog hadn't gone far when Grand Duke William and others came in front of him and stopped him. "The battle over there is not suitable for an existence like you." Grand Duke William looked at Rog and said in a calm tone, "In gaming terms, there is a term called exploding fish. It means that high-level gamers maliciously bully low-level gamers. In the past, I also hated these exploding fish players. But later on, I understood a principle. That is, in esports, being weak is the original sin." As soon as he finished speaking, Rog's figure disappeared in front of Grand Duke William and the others. Lightning body blink. Lightning sword slash. A silver-white arc instantly appeared in front of Grand Duke William. Grand Duke William didn't expect Rog to attack just like that. What surprised him even more was that Rog's speed was faster than he had imagined. Vampires were dark creatures with high agility and speed. However, compared to Rog, their speed talent was not worth mentioning. Even Grand Duke William, who was a duke, couldn't completely react. The katana, which was completely formed by lightning, slashed across Grand Duke William's neck as easily as cutting through a ripe watermelon. However, no blood splattered from the neck that was slashed by the lightning sword, nor was there a head that flew high into the air. There was only a group of black bats that were fluttering chaotically. Bat incarnation. The moment the lightning sword was about to slash him, Grand Duke William instantly transformed into hundreds of bats and dodged Rog's lightning sword. Rog wasn't surprised that Grand Duke William was able to dodge his lightning sword slash. If the Blood Race's dukes were so easily beheaded, the Blood Race would have long gone extinct in the long river of history. The moment Grand Duke William used his bat incarnation to dodge Rog's attack, the other 7 Blood Race dukes didn't stay idle and attacked Rog. Scarlet Whip. Blood Blade. Deathclaw. It was unknown whether it was because of tacit understanding or because they had discussed beforehand, but the 7 Blood Race Dukes didn't engage in close combat with Rog. Instead, they cast magic at the same time. The casting speed of these 7 Blood Race Dukes couldn't be considered slow, but Rog's casting speed wasn't slow either. Would release. Wooden spindle wall. Clang, clang, clang. A curved circular wall instantly appeared and completely enveloped Rog, who was wielding the lightning sword, while blocking the magic attacks of the 7 Blood Race Dukes. Although the wooden wall was a circular arch made of wood, in terms of defensive power, the wooden spindle wall's defensive power was not inferior to ordinary steel. While casting the wooden spindle wall to block the magic attacks of the 7 Blood Race Dukes, Rog removed the lightning sword in his right hand and used the wind release ninjutsu that he rarely used. Wind release, tornado hurricane. What had been a gentle breeze suddenly turned into a gigantic tornado. Like a natural disaster, it engulfed the 7 vampire dukes who had just cast their spells. The gigantic tornado struck the 7 vampire dukes in the blink of an eye, sweeping them into the sky and twisting their bodies wildly. If other vampires were hit by the tornado, they would definitely be twisted into fried dough twists even if they didn't die. However, as one of the top existences in the Blood Race, the means of the Blood Race Dukes were far from what other vampires could compare to. In the midst of the howling tornado, it was unrealistic to transform into a bat because no bat could escape from such a tornado. Shadow leap, moonlight flash, moonlight transformation. It had to be admitted that the Blood Race was several streets ahead of the werewolves in terms of magic talent and magic inheritance. Magic that was incomparably difficult for others was a piece of cake for the Blood Race Dukes. Relying on different flash magic and evasion magic, the 7 Blood Race Dukes all got rid of the tornado's attack. However, this was far from the end. As soon as the 7 Blood Race Dukes got rid of the tornado, they saw Rog suddenly appear on the wooden spindle wall. Wind release, vacuum chain wave. Before they could react, dozens of sickle weasel-like transparent wind blades came in front of them. The Blood Race Dukes were indeed good at magic, but Rog was also proficient in ninjutsu. Chapter 496. Not only were the 7 vampire dukes attacked by the sickle weasel-like wind blades, but even the bats that Grand Duke William had transformed into were also hit. Sharp cutting sounds rang out one after another. Shredded clothes and broken limbs flew up in a disorderly manner. Although these vampire dukes had speed and reaction that were far beyond that of ordinary people, none of them noticed that Rog's white eyes had turned into a blood-red color that was very similar to theirs. 3 Tomo Sharingan. When wind release, tornado hit these vampire dukes, Rog opened his Sharingan. With the Sharingan's unparalleled dynamic vision and rich experience honed over many years of combat, Rog accurately predicted the landing spot of these vampire dukes and used wind release, vacuum renbois in advance. Whether it was tornado or vacuum renbois, they were not particularly powerful wind release ninjutsu. But as long as they were used properly, even the most basic ninjutsu could produce an effect beyond imagination. After the end of vacuum renbois, Rog did not continue to use ninjutsu. Instead, he stood calmly on the arch of the wooden spindle wall and looked at these vampire dukes with a smile. Although the sickle weasel-like wind blades did not cause fatal damage to them, they seriously destroyed their image. The damage was not high, but it was extremely insulting. In addition to Grand Duke William, the other 7 vampire dukes had similar thoughts. Their clothes were messy and their hair was messy. Coupled with the wounds that had not been completely healed and the blood stained on their bodies, these vampire dukes were as embarrassed as they could be. Looking at their current image, rather than the legendary noble vampires, it was better to say that they were special lovers who had just experienced a forbidden party. Although their image was a bit embarrassing, these vampire dukes were old monsters who had lived for who knows how many years. They quickly adjusted their state of mind and recovered from their injuries. As for the damaged clothes, they could do nothing about it. After all, not everyone could repair their clothes directly with energy like Gila. The warm-up is over, it's time to start the real show. Rog ignored the cold eyes of the vampire dukes and jumped down from the wooden spindle wall, summoning the Kusanagi sword. Don't blame me for not reminding you. If you get injured, it's not something that can be recovered by consuming some energy. As soon as his voice fell, Rog summoned the orange-red hellfire and let it wrap around the Kusanagi sword. The moment the hellfire appeared, the countenances of Grand Duke William and the others turned extremely grim. As dark creatures, not only were they familiar with hellfire, but they were also very familiar with it. Although Johnny was the only Ghost Rider still alive, there had been more than one in the past. It is said that after the flood, God discovered that the sinful nature of man had not changed. However, he had promised that he would no longer use cruel means like the Great Flood to punish humans. Therefore, he developed and created the second batch of spirits of vengeance, which were called living weapons. He let the spirits of vengeance supervise the evil nature of humans. The spirit of vengeance descended from heaven in the form of a rain of fire and fused with the soul of its human host. In the end, it evolved into a Ghost Rider and shouldered the responsibility of cleansing the sins of the mortal world. Although Johnny also had the spirit of vengeance, he was a special kind of Ghost Rider. Because in his body, there was still the power of the elemental demon Lord Zartanos. Note 1, Ghost Riders were knights who cleansed the sins of the mortal world, but this didn't mean that they would only attack humans. Compared to humans, dark creatures like vampires and werewolves were more to the Ghost Riders' liking. Therefore, in the past few thousand years, the vampires had been harassed by Ghost Riders. But later on, for some unknown reason, the Ghost Riders disappeared one after another, and the vampires finally escaped the fate of being hunted down by the Ghost Riders. Although the Ghost Riders had disappeared, the deep memories left behind by Hellfire wouldn't disappear just like that. Lightning Body Blink. Rog wasn't interested in explaining Hellfire to Grand Duke William and the others, and once again used Lightning Body Blink. Although he had also disappeared, this time, Grand Duke William and the others were finally able to see Rog's route clearly. The Hellfire wrapped around the Kusanagi sword was like a guiding line, leaving behind an orange-red arc in the air. Of course, Rog knew that Hellfire would leave traces in the air, but he didn't take it to heart at all. Because seeing it didn't mean that he could block it. It was like seeing an afterimage left behind by an enemy who was too fast. Although he could see the afterimage, he couldn't keep up with the enemy's speed. After appearing in front of a vampire duke as if he had teleported, Rog didn't hesitate and directly swung the Kusanagi sword in his hand. Facing the Kusanagi sword wrapped in hellfire, the vampire duke didn't dare to be careless and hurriedly retreated. In the past, the vampires who had died tragically under hellfire had used their lives to leave behind an incomparably valuable advice for the vampires. There was no need to try to use blood magic to resist hellfire. Whether it was an energy shield like the blood shield or a physical defense like the earth wall, it was impossible to block hellfire's attack. This had nothing to do with whether energy or physical matter could block hellfire. It was purely because hellfire restrained the vampire's blood power. In front of hellfire, blood power was like butter thrown into a pot of oil. It melted on a whim and didn't give any face at all. The vampire Duke Rog chose first wasn't the weakest among the 8 dukes, but he wasn't the strongest either. What was more troublesome was that he wasn't the fastest. In front of Rog, who had used Lightning Body Blink, the vampire's pride in speed was like that of an ordinary human. The vampire duke, who had just recovered his right arm, didn't even take a few steps back before Rog's Kusanagi sword slashed across his neck like the Grim Reaper's scythe. As the top fighting force of the vampires, Duke-level vampires would never be burned to ashes again. Even if they were hit in the heart by an ultraviolet bullet or directly exposed to the sun, they wouldn't be reduced to ashes. However, at this moment, the vampire duke whose head had been chopped off by Logue's sword quickly burned into a pile of black ashes, just like the lowest level of vampires. With a fatal attack and the burning effect of hellfire, Rog let the vampire duke die in the same miserable way as a low-level vampire. First one. After dealing with the vampire duke, Rog said softly in a voice that Grand Duke William and the others could hear. Fried fish. This was the game term he had explained to Grand Duke William and the others just now. However, what Grand Duke William and the others didn't know was that the fried fish Rog was talking about wasn't him bullying the marquises or count-level vampires, but the 8 vampire dukes. Bullying the marquises and counts was fried fish to him. Bullying the dukes like Grand Duke William was also fried fish. Since they were all fish, there was no need to care too much about the level of the fish. After all, in front of kings, silver and gold were the same. Wait, maybe we can talk again. After watching a vampire duke die in Rog's hands, Grand Duke William realized how big the gap was between them and Rog. Talk again? I gave you a chance 3 days ago, but unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. As soon as he finished speaking, Rog disappeared again. Just as Grand Duke William was about to look around to see which duke would be chosen by Rog, Rog appeared in front of him like a ghost. Among these dukes, Grand Duke William was the only vampire duke who had dealt with Rog. However, this didn't mean that Rog would have any friendship with him and exclude him from the list of targets. Although Grand Duke William didn't expect to be Rog's second target, his reaction speed wasn't slow at all. In fact, he was even faster than the dead duke. In terms of strength, Grand Duke William was definitely the strongest among the 8 dukes. The Brooke clan was the clan that was best at fighting among the blood breeds. As the Duke of the Brooke clan, Grand Duke William's combat experience and skills were naturally the strongest among the Brooke clan. Just as the Kusanagi sword was about to hit him, Grand Duke William made a decision that even Rog praised. Grand Duke William didn't choose to retreat or dodge. Instead, he took the initiative to step forward and close the distance between himself and Rog. One had to admit that Grand Duke William's idea was very creative and effective. In terms of combat, the Kusanagi sword was definitely a close combat weapon. However, this didn't mean that the Kusanagi sword would be perfect in close combat. When the distance was shortened to the point where they were almost face-to-face, the Kusanagi sword would be limited by the distance and unable to display the effects it should have. This was also why a dagger was more useful than a sword in a real close combat. Relying on this method of closing the distance, Grand Duke William perfectly avoided the Kusanagi sword attack and blocked Rog's right hand with his left hand. Interesting. Looking at Grand Duke William, who was only 20 or 30 centimeters away from him, Rog once again praised Grand Duke William's combat intuition and fighting skills. After his right hand was blocked by Grand Duke William, Rog didn't hesitate and made a move that was also beyond Grand Duke William's expectations. He took the initiative to let go of his right hand and gave up the Kusanagi sword. The moment Rog let go of his right hand, Grand Duke William realized that something was wrong. But at this time, he didn't have time to change his tactics. Grand Duke William's left hand blocked Rog's right hand, while his right hand was like a sharp claw that grabbed Rog's neck. Just as Grand Duke William's right claw was about to grab Rog's neck, Rog's left hand hit his right wrist first and pushed his right hand away. Playing close combat in front of a ninja who had mastered Gentle Fist, 8 trigrams 64 palms, Rog didn't know for a moment whether to praise Grand Duke William's courage or arrogance. Chapter 497. If Rog were Grand Duke William, he would definitely not choose to continue attacking at this time. Instead, he would seize the rare opportunity to cast magic or directly retreat with speed. In a battle, one must always be cautious to avoid suddenly losing one's life. In the face of an opponent who was extremely good at close combat and whose trump cards were unknown, close combat sometimes not only did not bring about an advantage, but it could also easily become the key to a complete defeat. Thoughts flashed through his mind, but Rog's hand movements did not slow down in the slightest. Byakugan open. Under Grand Duke William's gaze, Rog's Sharingan disappeared and was replaced by the Byakugan, which had blue veins popping out beside his eyes. Soft Fist Technique. 8 trigrams 64 palms. Before Grand Duke William could fully react, Rog's left hand turned into a fist and hit a key acupoint on his chest. Of course, it was impossible for a vampire to have the chakra meridian system, and there were no so-called acupoints. The key acupoint that Rog had hit was actually an important energy node on Grand Duke William's body. However, in order to be more in line with the style of Soft Fist, he called all these energy nodes on the enemy's body acupoints. When the first palm of the 8 trigrams 64 palms hit Grand Duke William, the initiative of the battle completely fell into Rog's hands. Compared with other physical arts, the 8 trigrams 64 palms was a set of slightly cumbersome fist techniques, and the time to perform it was also longer. If it were other physical arts moves, this kind of continuous attack time of 2 or 3 seconds would be easy for the opponent to seize the opportunity to counterattack. The time to perform the 8 trigrams 64 palms was indeed a little longer than other physical arts moves, but this did not mean that it was easy to interrupt. If the 8 trigrams 64 palms were so easy to break, it would not have become the secret technique of the Hyuga clan. As long as the enemy could always be controlled in the rhythm of their attacks, it did not matter if the time to perform it was a little longer. In Rog's vision at this time, he and Grand Duke William were in an illusory 8 trigrams array, an 8 trigrams array that belonged to the 8 trigrams 64 palms. 16 palms. In the next second after hitting Grand Duke William's first palm, Rog's hands struck out 15 palms consecutively at a speed that surpassed the limits of what one could capture with their eyes, completing the first stage of the 64 8 trigrams palms. The first stage of the 16 palms did not focus on actual destructive power. As the opening move of a combo, the first 16 palms were mainly used to further restrict and deprive the opponent of the ability to resist. After the 16 critical acupoints were sealed, Grand Duke William discovered that the power of blood that he could control as easily as his own arm had suddenly become boundlessly sticky, like a ball of sticky paste. Almost at the same time that he noticed the abnormality in the power of blood, Rog struck out the next 32 palms. At this moment, not only did Grand Duke William sense the abnormality in his blood power, but he also sensed the abnormality in his body. At this moment, he was like a marionette who had completely lost the right to move his body freely. Before he could figure out what was going on, Rog had completed all 64 palms of the 8 trigrams. It was as if the power of his blood had been sealed. Intense pain spread from his body as he lost control of his body. Grand Duke William had planned to rely on close combat to obtain victory, but the development of the situation had completely gone against his plan. After finishing all 64 palms of the 8 trigrams, Rog could have ended the attack. However, he did not do so. The light blue chakra enveloped his right palm like a flame, causing it to emit a dazzling light like the sun. Then he used his right palm, which contained the terrifying power of chakra, to heavily strike Grand Duke William, who no longer had any power to fight back. 8 trigrams, mountain smashing strike. Rog's right palm was like a laser cannon, shooting out a huge light blue laser beam. It instantly sent Grand Duke William, who had been temporarily airborne due to the 64 palms of the 8 trigrams, flying. Boom! Grand Duke William, who had been hit by the 8 trigrams, mountain smashing strike, flew backward like a cannonball. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood as he crashed into one thick tree after another behind him. Rog's palm not only sent Grand Duke William flying over 100 meters, but it also left a ditch that was more than 2 meters wide and dozens of meters long on the ground. Was this guy still human? After witnessing the scene of Rog violently beating up Grand Duke William from the VIP seats, the same thought appeared in the minds of the remaining 6 blood breed dukes. In the blood breed's view, humans had always been fragile creatures that were like food. They knew that there were some existences among humans that were called monsters. However, they had never imagined that Grand Duke William, who was the strongest in the blood breed, would be as weak as a baby in front of Rog. At this moment, they finally understood why Rog had called the first round of fighting a warm-up. After sending Grand Duke William flying, Rog immediately turned around and looked at the remaining 6 blood breed dukes with shining eyes. "Don't say that I bullied you. Come at me together." As he spoke, he deliberately hooked his finger at the dukes as if to say, "Come over quickly." However, the 6 blood breed dukes did not attack him as he had expected. Instead, they retreated a distance with great tacit understanding and shook their heads at the same time. Weren't these guys a little too cowardly? Wasn't Grand Duke William still alive? At the final stage of the mountain smash, Rog intentionally held back some of his strength and controlled the power of the mountain smash to the extent that it could only severely injure Grand Duke William but not kill him. At the beginning, he did have the intention of killing a few blood-breed dukes to let these dukes, who had seriously broken away from the bottom of the hierarchy, understand the threat of death. However, he changed his mind when he used the 64 palms of the 8 trigrams to attack Grand Duke William. He did not care what tricks these blood-breed dukes could play, but he was curious whether they could rescue Cain from the seal. Cain, the ancestor of the blood breed, was the third human in the myths and legends. Of course, this myth referred to the legend of God and heaven. The myths of other civilizations would not admit this. For example, Wuxia myths and Norse myths. Just as he was about to give up on communicating and use his fists to persuade the remaining 6 blood-breed dukes, Grand Duke William's voice sounded from afar. Don't make things difficult for them. Even if you continue to attack them, they will only think about how to escape and not fight to the death with you. Grand Duke William's words could be said to have given the 6 dukes a hard slap in the face. However, not only did the 6 dukes not express any dissatisfaction, but they also nodded in agreement. *CK. Looking at the 6 blood-breed dukes who had completely lost their will to fight, Rog cursed in his heart. After standing in place and waiting for nearly half a minute, Grand Duke William, who had been sent flying, finally returned in front of Rog. At this moment, Grand Duke William no longer had the demeanor of an aristocrat. His expensive, custom-made clothes had completely become beggar's clothes. We admit defeat. The 8 sacred weapons will be sent to the hotel tomorrow morning. Without any discussion with the other 6 dukes, Grand Duke William immediately decided to admit defeat and hand over the sacred weapons. From the perspective of the clans, Grand Duke William did not have the right to decide the sacred weapons of the other clans. However, the 6 dukes of the other clans had tacitly agreed with Grand Duke William's decision. It seems that they should not address you as Grand Duke, but as Your Majesty. Although Grand Duke William was only a duke, from his current performance, he was no different from the king of the blood breeds. The title of Your Majesty is not something that I can bear. Grand Duke William knew what Rog meant and immediately denied Rog's words. I hope to see the remaining 8 sacred weapons before noon tomorrow. For Rog, it was not difficult to completely kill Grand Duke William and the others. However, this would increase the difficulty of obtaining the 8 sacred weapons, and he might even fail. After thinking seriously for a few seconds, he accepted Grand Duke William's suggestion to admit defeat. However, just as Grand Duke William was about to ask the other blood breeds to stop, Rog immediately stopped him. Let them continue fighting. I'll ask the people from Konoha to stop, and you can ask the marquises to stop as well. Although Rog did not say it clearly, Grand Duke William immediately understood his intentions. He wanted the blood breeds to use their lives to train the werewolves. Although this would lead to a large number of deaths, Grand Duke William finally agreed to Rog's request. Under Grand Duke William's signal, the blood breeds who besieged Fenrir, Abomination, and the others immediately withdrew from the battlefield and looked at Grand Duke William with a puzzled expression. Fenrir and the others also noticed that something was wrong, but before they had time to show their skills, they received Rog's order to retreat. At the same time, the Punishers and the Special Forces also stopped attacking. This battle between the blood breeds and the werewolves, after some unexpected factors, finally returned to its original state. Aren't you afraid that all the werewolves will die here? Although the blood breeds withdrew from the battle, the blood breeds still had the advantage, and the number of deaths was far less than the werewolves. If they die, it can only mean that they are not suitable to join Konoha. Rog answered calmly, as if he was stating a fact that everyone knew. It's no wonder that Konoha can become a frightening fighting organization. With a director like you, how can Konoha be weak? Grand Duke William thought that Rog only accepted these werewolves for the sake of the blood breed's sacred tool and sympathized with the tragic experience of the werewolves. Now it seems that his guess was wrong from the beginning. No, you think too much. I didn't make Konoha cold-blooded. I just told them that if they were bullied, then they should double back. Of course, in this process, I also contributed some insignificant help. Rog didn't think that Konoha could have its current reputation because of him. He just gave Konoha's people weapons and put forward some of his own opinions. As for those records, they were fought by the superheroes like the Punishers and Konoha's special forces. Chapter 498. When Roger had used the 8 trigrams, Mountain Crushing Strike, which had the visual effect of a laser cannon, to send Grand Duke William flying, the werewolves had thought that they would soon welcome the dawn of victory. However, within a few minutes, they found that things were developing in a direction they didn't expect at all. Fenrir, the king of the werewolves who they just recognized, withdrew from the battle, and the Red Tank, who helped them open the way for the charge, also withdrew from the battle. Even Konoha's special forces, who were remotely assisting them in the rear, also withdrew from the battle. Although the werewolves were not a race known for their IQ, it didn't mean that they were idiots with developed limbs and no brains. In particular, the werewolves present were basically all alpha werewolves. Among the beta werewolves or omega werewolves, there may be some completely brainless idiots. But the alpha werewolves who could become the leader of a small group would never be brainless. If they didn't even have this most basic thinking ability, they couldn't become alpha werewolves. If it was only Fenrir and others who withdrew from the battle, these werewolves may not be able to guess Rog's plan in a short time. But after seeing that the marquises who attacked Fenrir and others also withdrew from the battle, they quickly understood. If they want to win, they can only rely on themselves. Although Konoha's practice of abandoning them without saying a word made these werewolves feel a little dissatisfied, they were also very clear about their current situation. It was impossible to resist Konoha. It was impossible to resist Konoha in this life. These werewolves didn't forget that the alpha werewolf King Michael only asked half a question, and his head was cut off by Rog. Even the alpha werewolf king had no power to fight back, of course. The lower alpha werewolves would have no chance. Although the marquises of the kindred withdrew from the battle, under the leadership of those counts, the werewolves slowly fell into a disadvantageous position and lost the initiative of the battle little by little. If it weren't for the presence of the 3 alpha werewolves, the werewolves would only be defeated faster and more miserably. Although Bran inherited the position of alpha werewolf king of Henry and Michael, his strength didn't keep up with his status. Now, he was still an alpha werewolf. At best, he could only be regarded as a relatively good alpha werewolf. As time passed, more and more werewolves fell, and the vampires' attacks became more and more lethal. This was especially true for the vampire counts who had mastered magic. They were like messengers of death, harvesting the lives of the werewolves in a frenzy. 3 minutes after Fenrir and the others left the battle, the number of fallen werewolves exceeded 100. In addition to the werewolves who had died in battle, there were over 400 werewolves who would forever remain on this land. Are you sure you want to continue? They are about to completely lose their will to fight. Grand Duke William calmly asked Rog as he looked at the battlefield with an indifferent expression. Looks like we're seeing something different. What I see isn't a group of werewolves who have lost their will to fight, but a group of werewolves who are about to explode. In terms of casualties, the werewolves' death rate had reached a shocking 1/3. However, Rog did not intend to end things here. When he was playing strategy games, he had a bad habit, which was that he would only use a large amount of resources to cultivate high-level troops. In his strategic system, there was no such thing as a basic troop class. Therefore, he would only cultivate a small number of high-level troops, and then they would be completely destroyed by the opponent's mixed forces composed of high-level and high-level troops. He knew that this habit was not good, but so far, he has no plans to change this habit for the time being. This can also be seen from the number of Konoha's special forces. Konoha's intelligence agency, a violent organization that has used force to defeat many opponents, has only a little over 300 combatants so far. More than 200 special forces members who have been strengthened by extremists once, plus more than 60 Umbu members who have been strengthened twice. These more than 300 people are Konoha's conventional armed forces. If Rog remembers correctly, the number of police officers in a New York police station is about 360 people. Note 1. This is still under the premise that only police officers are counted. If civilian personnel are included, There are more than 550 people in a New York police station. Although Secretary of State Ross has been reminding Rog openly and secretly that he can increase the number of Konoha's special forces appropriately, he has never done so. Perhaps it is precisely because of his unreasonable insistence that Konoha's special forces have the combat effectiveness of any agency in the United States. Not to mention compared with ordinary agents or army soldiers, even compared with the famous SEALs, Konoha's special forces can easily defeat enemies 10 times their own number. The reason why Rog remembered it so clearly was that Secretary of State Ross had arranged a meaningless battle before. A Konoha Special Forces team of 6 people fought against 10 SEALs combat squads of 8 people. The result was obvious. Konoha's Special Forces won easily, and it could even be regarded as a crushing victory. Since that time, Ross has never talked to Rog about increasing Konoha's special forces. Before setting off from the abandoned factory tonight, Rog roughly speculated how many werewolves could return alive. More than 300. According to his estimations, only 300 or so werewolves would be able to leave this place alive. Of course, whether his estimation is correct or not depends on when these werewolves will awaken. Apart from magic factors, the werewolf's physique is actually not worse than vampires. But the life of escape has made these werewolves instinctively afraid of vampires. What Rog is doing now is to reawaken the wildness and blood of these werewolves. Aren't you afraid of vampires? Then I'll arrange a big fight between you and vampires. Whether you die like a coward with fear, fight to the end with blood, or leave with your head held high, it depends on your own ability. This approach is cruel, but it is the fastest way to awaken the blood and wildness of these werewolves. Time continued to pass, and the werewolves continued to die. Although these werewolves also took the lives of some vampires, compared to the number of werewolves, the number of vampires who died was less than 1/3 of theirs. Soon, the number of werewolves dropped from more than 800 to more than 700. Then, from more than 700, it dropped to more than 500. Although he was quite a distance away from the battlefield, Rog could clearly smell the scent of blood that was blown by the night wind. If he could smell the scent of blood even though he was almost 100 meters away from the battlefield, the werewolves in the center of the battlefield would of course be even more aware. Just as the number of werewolves was about to drop below 500, a werewolf covered in blood suddenly let out a howl filled with indignation and anger. It's actually him? Henry really has a good eye. This werewolf howling crazily as if he had completely lost control was none other than Bran, who was once heavily groomed by Henry. Through the Byakugan, Rog could see Bran's blood-red eyes. He could see his growing fangs and claws. He could also see the inhuman aura that belonged to a beast. Under the immense pressure of death and the unwillingness of his own kind being slaughtered, Bran crossed the natural chasm between Alpha Werewolf and Alpha Wolf King, and was promoted to Alpha Wolf King. Before the vampires could react, Bran, who had completely awakened his wildness, charged towards them like a ghost. What followed was a primitive and bloody show of slaughter. Broken limbs, severed arms, heads, organs. The newly promoted Alpha Wolf King Bran was like a meat grinder, crazily shredding the vampires in front of him. Vampire Baron did. Vampire Viscount did. Vampire Count did. In front of Bran, no vampire could escape his fangs and claws. One by one they went to hell. Bran's sudden awakening not only allowed him to obtain strength and speed far surpassing before, but more importantly, he awakened the other werewolves. Wolf howls filled with anger and unwillingness sounded one after another. One by one, the werewolves opened the door of wildness that originally belonged to them, but was personally closed by them. Although the wolves in the zoo and the wolves in the wild were both wolves, the difference between them was at least 10 huskies. A wolf without wildness and blood was just a pet dog with the appearance of a wolf. In 10 minutes, call a halt to the battle. Rog said to Duke William and Fenrir beside him as he looked at Bran, who had transformed into a bloodthirsty beast, with satisfaction. After planning for so long, he finally saw the werewolf troops he wanted. 10 minutes was not long, but it was not short either. It mainly depended on whether you were the one being beaten or the one being beaten in these 10 minutes. When the 10-minute countdown ended, Grand Duke William and Fenrir stopped the vampires and werewolves fighting at the same time. However, one of them used magic to transmit his voice, and the other directly looked up to the sky and howled. Although still unwilling, Bran, who had just been promoted to Alpha Wolf King, did not completely lose his mind. In accordance with Fenrir's howl, he stopped his attack. Remember to send the sacred tool tomorrow. After reminding Grand Duke William again, Rog jumped on Fenrir's back and rode Fenrir to the remaining werewolves. Looking at the werewolves, who were panting but still exuding a majestic killing intent, Rog nodded with satisfaction and slowly said, "Welcome to Konoha." After hearing Rog's words, the werewolves looked up at him at the same time, and then issued the most uniform howl of the night. Woo! After this battle, only 276 werewolves left alive, and more than 800 werewolves completely stayed here. However, they were not alone, because there were more than 600 vampires who were sleeping here with them. Chapter 499. In terms of the number of deaths, the werewolves were undoubtedly the loser in this battle. But whether it was Rog or the surviving werewolves, they didn't think that they had failed. In the case of a numerical disadvantage, they had an exchange ratio of 1-0. 75 with the vampires, who had oppressed them for many years. For the werewolves, this was a brilliant victory that they had never imagined before. Although the number of dead alpha werewolves was indeed beyond their imagination, the surviving werewolves would no longer have any fear of vampires. Wasn't it just 4 for 3? This was not a problem at all for the werewolves, whose fertility was far superior to vampires. After the battle was over, Logue had the surviving werewolves hold a simple funeral for their fallen brethren. Then, he opened the portal back to Konoha's headquarters. Looking at the huge portal with a diameter of more than 10 meters, Bran and other werewolves pressed their right hand on their heart and saluted Rog. Under the leadership of the Punishers and other members of the Special Forces, the surviving 276 werewolves came to Konoha's headquarters, which was feared by the outside world like a tiger. When Fenrir and Xiao He, who were walking at the back, also entered the portal, Rog ended the portal magic that was extremely in line with Kamardaj's aesthetic style. Although the werewolf's recovery ability was good, in order to ensure that his werewolf troops would not decline due to some objective factors, Rog sent them to Konoha's headquarters for the first time. Konoha's headquarters had top-notch medical resources, which could give the werewolves the best treatment that had just experienced a bloody battle. Although the battle between the werewolves and the vampires was over, the smell of blood lingering on the grass did not dissipate for a long time. After looking around the battlefield, Rog used quantum transmission and returned to the 5-star suite of the Beverly Hills Hotel. Before getting the 8 sacred tools of the vampires, he would not leave Los Angeles for the time being. The next morning, Rog had just finished breakfast in the hotel's restaurant when he saw the messenger sent by the vampires. "Mr. Rog, good morning. My name is Peter, and I was sent by Grand Duke William to deliver a gift. The Grand Duke's gift has now arrived at the hotel parking lot. Do you want to receive it in the parking lot or directly to your room?" The messenger sent by Grand Duke William at this time was a young vampire who looked to be in his early 20s. Rog saw Peter last night. If he remembered correctly, Peter was one of the vampire marquises who attacked Fenrir last night. He was already a vampire marquis at such a young age. This vampire named Peter's future was limitless. After looking at Peter, Rog casually said, "Send it directly to my room." But after receiving Rog's reply, Peter didn't stay any longer. He immediately left the dining hall and ordered the accompanying vampires to deliver the box containing the sacred weapon to Rog's room. Although they were of the vampires of the vampires, it of the vampires of the vampires of the hotel of the vampires of vampires. After sending all the sacred artifacts to Roger's room, Peter did not immediately leave the hotel. Instead, he returned to the restaurant. "Mr. Rog, the Grand Duke's gift has all been sent to your room. The Grand Duke specially instructed me to give it to you. I hope you can accept it." After saying that, Peter, who was wearing an expensive custom-made suit, took out a pure black business card from the pocket of his jacket and handed it to Rog with both hands. This pure black business card looked just like a piece of black paper. But after really getting it in his hands, Rog discovered that this business card was actually a kind of black metal he had never seen before. Not only that, but there were also magic fluctuations on the business card. Unlike other business cards, this black business card did not have any name or contact information on it. There was only a slightly complicated imprint. A solidified communication magic array. Interesting, is this the foundation of the vampires? Although Logue wasn't a professional mage, his knowledge of magic wasn't weak. Just by simply observing a few magic patterns on the imprint, he inferred the real function of this business card. This was a communication magic array that could contact Grand Duke William at any time. Of course, Grand Duke William could also contact Rog in reverse. I'll accept the gift. Thank Grand Duke William for his generosity on my behalf. Although Peter was a vampire marquis specially arranged by Grand Duke William to deliver the vampires of the vampires of the vampires, it was not difficult to infer from Peter's previous words that he did not know what these so-called gifts were. Okay, then I'll take my leave first. After bowing slightly to Rog, Peter left the restaurant and left the hotel with the accompanying vampires. Evil key, decayed bracelet, magic puppet, blood cup, spirit staff, soul ring, punishment axe, illusion mirror. After returning to the hotel suite, Rog checked the vampires of the vampires sent by Grand Duke William. There was nothing wrong with the vampires, but the vampires of the corpse hand, which he was most curious about, was not among them. The corpse hand was said to be the left hand of Cain, the ancestor of the vampires. Because the secret of the world was hidden in his hand, it was cut off. As for whether the person who cut off the left hand was Cain himself or someone else, it was unknown. In addition to the bone harp, butcher's knife, ghost lantern and poison bottle obtained from the werewolf, Rog now has 12 of the 13 vampires of the vampires. To some extent, he should be the first person to collect the 12 vampires of the vampires after the birth of these vampires. Although he did not collect all the 13 vampires, he was quite satisfied to be able to do this to this extent. As for the corpse hand, whose whereabouts were unknown, he did not care too much about it. Even if he could not find it, it was not a particularly troublesome matter. As long as the vampires can rescue their ancestor Cain from the sealed land, the corpse hand can make another one. Isn't it just Cain's left hand? Just cut it off. With Cain's recovery ability, not to mention a left hand, even if he lost 10 left hands, he could grow them back. After playing with the 8 vampires sent by Peter, Rog threw them all into the summon scroll, and then used quantum transmission to return to the underground training room of Konoha's headquarters. As soon as the aurora-like brilliant light dissipated, he put his hands together and used an ability that he had not used for a long time. Inherent enchantment, Shikatsu Forest. In the blink of an eye, his private training room, which had an obvious modern style, had turned into a lush forest. Looking at this lush forest that he had once used to cultivate immortal mode and had even served as a logistics transit station, Rog took a deep breath and sighed with emotion. After ending the memories in his mind, he came to a wide open space and used a mokutan that he had just thought of a name. Heinan, 3 rooms and 2 halls jutsu. As the chakra in his body continued to pour out, a building made entirely of wood appeared in front of him. Building a house with mokutan was not his original idea. A ninja who inherited mokutan and did not want to reveal his name once invented a mokutan ninjutsu that used mokutan to build a house. At this time, Rog was just using the idea of this ninja. However, he did not completely use the architectural style of that ninja, but used the style of the Hall of Supreme Harmony in the Forbidden City of China. In other words, he directly copied the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Except for the color that was not the classic red and yellow, the building that appeared in front of Rog was exactly the same as the Hall of Supreme Harmony in his memory. There were 11 rooms wide, 5 rooms deep, 64. 24 meters long, 37 meters wide, 26. 92 meters high, and the building area was 2,377 square meters. Note 1, there seems to be something wrong. With his precise control, Rog can be sure that the Hall of Supreme Harmony he copied will not have too much error. But he doesn't know why. He always felt that something was wrong. It's not a problem with the color, it's the kind of place that is obviously conspicuous, but you can't pay attention to it for a while. After frowning and seriously recalling for a few minutes, Rog finally knew what the problem was. Platform base. It's the lack of a platform base. Since his own Earth release is not very good, Rog directly gave up the idea of using Earth release to create a platform base, but continued to use Mokuton. When the platform base completely made of wood was completely formed, the Hall of Supreme Harmony in front of him was finally completed. After happily admiring his Mokuton, Hall of Supreme Harmony, he walked up the wooden steps to the Hall of Supreme Harmony and pushed open the door. Although the structure of the main hall was the same as in his memory, there weren't as many fancy things. For example, he didn't create the Emperor's throne that represented feudal rule. After entering the main hall, the first thing he saw were 2 rows of parallel wooden tables. After arriving at the innermost table on the left, he took out the reality Rubik's Cube containing the gem of reality and placed it on the specially designed table. Then he summoned the eternal fire from the psychic scroll and placed it on the first table on the right, opposite the reality Rubik's Cube. After placing the eternity fire on the table, he summoned a golden disc from the mediumship scroll and placed it on the second table on the right. Then, he permanently peeled off a part of the hellfire that he plundered from Ghost Rider Johnny and placed it on the disc, allowing the hellfire to burn like the eternal fire. After doing all this, he directly left the main hall, randomly picked a room on the left side of the main hall, and placed the 12 holy artifacts of the Blood Kindred there. For the Blood Kindred, these holy artifacts were incomparably precious. But for Rog, these holy artifacts were just ordinary collectibles that had just surpassed the standard of his collection. If he placed these 12 holy artifacts in the main hall, not only would it be an insult to the Gem of Reality and the Eternal Fire, but it would also be an insult to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. That's right, the Hall of Supreme Harmony. After using Mokuton to create the platform base of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, he decided on the real name of this ninjutsu. Mokuton, Hall of Supreme Harmony. In addition to the 12 holy artifacts of the Blood Kindred, he also placed the Hell Scroll that he hadn't officially signed with Mephisto in this room. Then, he returned to the main hall of the Hall of Supreme Harmony and seriously looked at the 3 collectibles, the Gem of Reality, the Eternal Fire, and the Hellfire. Although he didn't have many collectibles now, he believed that sooner or later, he would be able to fill all 12 tables in the main hall. Because now, he had already determined the next collectibles in the main hall. The Crown of the Flame Giant Sir. Chapter 500. Konoha Headquarters, Dr. Connor's Laboratory. Sir, this is all the research reports of Super Skrull. According to the advice you gave, we combined the research results of Super Skrull and successfully developed this combat glove called Endless Greed. Dr. Lizard, wearing a white coat, introduced it to Rog with excitement and kept waving his arms like a conductor of an orchestra. Compared with Dr. Lizard Connors, who was almost crazy, Mr. Wonder Reed was much calmer. If it wasn't for the expression of "I'm very powerful" that involuntarily appeared on his face, Rog would have thought that his heart really didn't fluctuate. Today is the 7th day since Rog returned to Konoha headquarters. In the past 7 days, in addition to getting himself a Taiha treasure haul, he spent the rest of his time in Dr. Connor's laboratory, using his profit advantage to provide them with some unique advice. The secret of Super Skrull copying other people's superpowers was studied by Dr. Connors and Reed a long time ago. Simply put, the reason why Super Skrull can copy other people's superpowers is that they have genes that can be freely changed. In general, the genes of creatures are fixed. Even for those who have awakened their superpowers, their genes are still in a stable state. Creatures with unstable genes may die completely at any time because of genetic collapse. However, the genes of the Super Skrull broke this rule to some extent. They can adjust their genes to the same as the target person, thereby copying other people's superpowers. Although this is not in line with the biological science on Earth, Super Skrull proves one point with its own existence, that is, the universe is big, and any strange creatures may be born. The secret of Super Skrull was studied by Dr. Connors and Reed. However, how to use this special genetic structure of Super Skrull in other aspects has become a problem. Just when Dr. Connors and Mr. Wonder Reed were at a loss, Rog, who has the prophet aura, provided them with a feasible direction. Speaking of this, it is necessary to mention the parallel universe where mutants exist. In a parallel universe with mutants, there was a mutant called Mystique. Her superpower was similar to that of the Skrulls. She could change her appearance at will. Mystique's superpower wasn't particularly powerful. Aside from her ability to infiltrate and camouflage, she didn't have any outstanding offensive abilities. However, a scientist named Bolivar Trask had the foresight to discover the brilliant future of Mystique's genes. Therefore, after thoroughly studying Mystique's genes, he created the Sentinel robot that almost ended the mutants forever. Through a special internal structure, the Sentinel robots could replicate the superpowers of the mutants. They could also adjust their own form or share the superpowers with other Sentinel robots. With these Sentinel robots, Bolivar Trask almost wiped out all the mutated humans. But unfortunately, the future without mutated humans that he was looking forward to was reversed by a mutated human who smoked, drank, and drove a motorcycle. Note 1. Rog didn't know how Bolivar Trask applied Mystique's genetic characteristics to the Sentinel robots, so that these mechanical creations had the ability to replicate mutant superpowers. However, the unique mechanical structure of the Sentinel robots and the visual effects displayed when replicating mutant superpowers left a very deep impression on him. So, he talked about what he saw in the Sentinel robots with Mr. Wonder Reed in detail. In the field of science, Rog is at most an ordinary person with more strange knowledge in his mind. Asking him to give practical research ideas and directions is purely embarrassing for him. However, he can be the one who provides the key. After explaining what he had seen on the Sentinel robot to Mr. Miracle, Reed felt as if he had suddenly opened a door he had never known before. The next thing is very logical. Reed, who will receive nicknames such as the smartest man on Earth and Magic Rod Reed, in the future, used practical actions to prove to Rog what a cheat-like wisdom was. The genetic secrets of the Super Skrull, the idea of the Sentinel robots given by Rog, plus the unreasonable cheat-like IQ of Mr. Wonder Reed. A glove with the ability to replicate other people's superpowers. Endless Greed was born. Of course, because of time, the Endless Greed that appeared in front of Rog was only a first-generation product, and its potential and performance were far from the limit. After Mr. Wonder Reed's test, Endless Greed currently only replicated a target's superpower. And after replication, this superpower will be solidified and can't be replaced at any time like the Sentinel robots. In addition, Endless Greed also has a small limitation. To replicate the target's superpower, Endless Greed must be removed from the target. Touching the target's body or touching the target's blood is fine. From a scientific point of view, this is because Endless Greed needs to understand the genetic characteristics and structure of the target in advance, and then copy and imitate. Although Endless Greed is only a first-generation version, and there are certain limitations, this does not affect Rog's evaluation of it. He doesn't need the Sentinel robots, a perverted product. Endless Greed, which can only replicate and imitate a target, is enough to meet his needs. Mr. Rog, although the glove's ability to replicate and imitate has passed some simple tests, this is only a first-generation version. So be careful when using it. In addition, if you don't mind, I hope you can let me retest the glove after using it. Unlike Dr. Connors and others, Mr. Wonder Reed, who has just joined Konoha not long ago, did not address Rog as Lord or Hokage-sama, but maintained the initial polite address. No problem. I'll give you the glove again then. Because Endless Greed will be completely fixed once it truly replicates other people's superpowers, Reed has not tested Endless Greed in a real sense. Simply put, from a theoretical point of view, Endless Greed could replicate other people's superpowers like the Super Skrulls. But whether the effect will really be so good as the inventor, Mr. Wonder Reed is not particularly sure. After all, new scientific products are often related to accidents. You should rest for a while. You've worked hard during this time. After thanking Dr. Connors and Reed, Rog took the endless greed that looks like leather but is actually made of nanometal and left. After returning to his office, he adjusted the glove to match the size of his right hand. Then he made a phone call to Dr. Doom. Are you ready to conquer Muspelheim? At noon the next day, Rog opened the portal connecting to Doom's castle and let him come to Konoha's headquarters. Like the last time they met, Doom was still dressed in the metal mask and armor. Of course, the green robe that symbolized the identity of the monarch of Ladovinia was still on him. Rog did not take Doom to visit Konoha's headquarters. To be precise, he did not even let Doom step into Konoha's headquarters building. After casting the portal magic, Doom arrived at the grassland behind the headquarters building. Then he mobilized the mana in his body and cast the portal magic again. Asgard Bifrost Hall. Dr. Doom thought that Rog would take him directly to Muspelheim, the country of the flame giants. Unexpectedly, Rog took him to Asgard. After arriving at the Bifrost Hall, Roger briefly explained his intentions to Heimdall, the guardian of the Bifrost, and then received 2 Bifrost tickets to Muspelheim. Say hello to Thor for me. Because of Dr. Doom, Rog did not plan to go to the Golden Palace to meet Thor, and quickly left Asgard with Doom. Although Rog appreciates some of Doom's practices, it does not mean that he has forgotten what kind of person Doom is. This is a supervillain known for pursuing the mysteries of the universe at all costs. Letting him stay in Asgard is no different from letting a mouse into a grain barn. Muspelheim, the country of the flame giants, a world like a lava hell. Rog did not let Heimdall send them directly to Surta, but let Heimdall choose a teleportation point at random. When the brilliant light of Bifrost dissipated, the true face of Muspelheim was revealed in front of them for the first time. After carefully observing the world composed of black earth and red magma in front of him, Rog lifted the infinite mode that he had just cast. Although the natural conditions of Muspelheim are a bit harsh, it has not reached the point where human lives will be endangered in a short time. In addition to being a little hot, Muspelheim does not emit deadly gases containing hydrogen chloride and its derivatives like volcanoes on Earth. At least in the view of Rog, who has the body of an immortal, the air in Muspelheim is not dangerous. How are you? Do you need to maintain your status through magic? Rog turned to Dr. Doom and asked. Unlike the last trip to Hell, this time they would stay here for a while and explore Muspelheim, which was known as the Country of Fire. It's okay, it doesn't affect my status without magic. The concentration of natural energy here is very high. Even if magic is maintained 24 hours a day, it won't have much impact. Doom's armor just looks a little quaint, but in fact, his armor is not much worse than Tawny's Iron Man armor. Maintaining vital signs is just a simple function. That's good, let's go. After that, Rog took the lead and walked forward. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.